The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairtom.com is the website, xchairtom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Superbeats. More information is available over at thomsbeats.com, thomsbeets.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Thom, Thom. The Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. This is an 1856 first English translation edition of this author. And but you can still get it online. A lot of different booksellers sell it. This is from chapter 11. What sort of despotism democratic nations have to fear? I had remarked during my stay in the United States that a democratic state of society, similar to that of the Americans, might offer singular facilities for the establishment of despotism. And I perceived, upon my return to Europe, how much use had already been made by most of our rulers of the notions, the sentiments, and the wants engendered by this same social condition for the purpose of extending the circle of their power. This led me to think that the nations of Christendom would perhaps eventually undergo some sort of oppression like that which hung over several of the nations of the ancient world. But it would seem that if despotism were to be established among the democratic nations of our days, it might assume a different character, different from the Roman Empire, for example. It might be more extensive and more mild. It would degrade men without tormenting them. I do not question that in an age of instruction and equality like our own, sovereigns might more easily succeed in collecting all political power into their own hands and might interfere more habitually and decidedly within the circle of private interests than any sovereign of antiquity ever could do. But the same principle of equality which facilitates despotism tempers its rigor. When no member of the community has much power or much wealth, tyranny, as it were, without opportunities, tyranny is, as it were, without opportunities or a field of action. As all fortunes are scanty, the passions of men are naturally circumscribed, their imagination limited, their pleasures simple. This universal moderation moderates the sovereign himself and checks within certain limits the inordinate stretch of his own desires. Independently of these reasons, drawn from the nature of the state of society itself, I might add many others arising from causes beyond my subject, but I shall keep within the limits I have laid down to myself. Democratic governments may become violent and even cruel at certain periods of extreme effervescence or of great danger. Excuse me, think of George Bush and 9/11. But these crises will be rare and brief. When I consider the petty passions of our contemporaries, the mildness of their manners, the extent of their education, the purity of their religion, the gentleness of their morality, their regular and industrious habits, and the restraint with which they almost all observe in their vices, no less than in their virtues, I have no fear that they will meet with tyrants in their rulers, but rather guardians. I think then that the species of oppression by which democratic nations are menaced is unlike anything that ever existed before in our world. Our contemporaries will find no prototype of it in their memories. I am trying myself to choose an expression which will accurately convey the whole of the idea I have formed of it. But in vain. The old words, despotism and tyranny, are inappropriate. The thing itself is new, and since I cannot name it, I must attempt to define it. I seek to trace the novel features under which despotism may appear in the world. The first thing that strikes the observation is an immutable multitude of men, all equal and alike, incessantly endeavoring to procure the petty and paltry pleasures with which they glut their lives. Think now of a television society. Each of them living apart is as a stranger to the fate of all the rest. His children and his private friends constitute to him the whole of mankind. As for the rest of his fellow citizens, he is close to them, but he sees them not. He touches them, but he feels them not. He exists, but in himself and for himself alone. And if his kindred still remain to him, he may be said at any rate to have lost his country. Above this race of men stands an immense and tutelary power, which takes upon itself alone to secure their gratifications and to watch over their fate. Facebook? That power is absolute, minute, regular, provident, and mild. It would be like the authority of a parent if, like that authority, its object was to prepare men for manhood. But it seeks, on the contrary, to keep them in perpetual childhood. It is well content that people should rejoice, providing that they think of nothing but rejoicing. For their happiness, such a government willingly labors, but it chooses to be the sole agent and only arbiter of that happiness. It provides for their security, foresees and supplies their necessities, facilitates their pleasures, manages their principal concerns, directs their industry, regulates the descent of property, and subdivides their inheritances. What remains but to spare them all the care of thinking and all the trouble of living? Thus, it every day renders the exercise of the free agency of man less useful and less frequent. It circumscribes the will within a narrower range and gradually robs a man of all the
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Jefferson Smith. This is the Thom Hartmann Program. It has been an honor to be with you this week on Monday, Wednesday, and today, Friday the 13th. As superstition says, the day King Philip arrested the Knights Templar, the day highlighted by Thomas Lawson's 1907 novel Friday the 13th, when an unscrupulous broker took advantage of the superstition to create a Wall Street panic, a superstition that may have arisen in the Middle Ages, originating from the story of Jesus' Last Supper and crucifixion when 13 were present the night before, the 2 days being connected before the 19th century. Will today be unlucky for current President Donald Trump or for American democracy? For Trey Gowdy and the Red Wall or the FBI? For the NATO alliance or for Vladimir Putin's efforts to tear it asunder? For Theresa May or for Brexit? For the American economy or for the middle class and working Americans? For Roe versus Wade, health insurance and voting rights, or for Brett Kavanaugh's appointment to the Supreme Court? We are going to start out with the Trump NATO. Trump's visit to NATO and his continued habit to go after people who have previously been thought of as our closest allies and treat them poorly while treating friendly those who are our adversaries. And I'm not making that up. It just seems like the pattern. We're going to bring in somebody who knows more than I do to confirm or deny that, but also to give us some background. Do we still need NATO? Why does Putin want it gone? Why does Trump attack it? How does it work? Should other NATO nations, in fact, kick in 4% of their GDP to equal the United States, or should our country head towards or even below the 2% of GDP, military spending, the ratio of other nations? Joining us on the air is Peter Beinart. Peter from The Atlantic has written a series of stories, including What's the Point of NATO Anyway? Peter, good morning. Peter, you there? Peter can't hear us. We will be getting to Peter in a moment. Today is Anything Goes Friday. We will take your calls. The call-in number here is 202-808-9925. It's 202-808-9925. Today we'll be asking again, as we do on Fridays from time to time, on Anything Goes, what's the big lie? What are the big dishonesties that we need to be paying attention to? Also, what's the big miss? What do we need to attend to? And you can call in at 202-808-9925. One of the things that has been brought up by the president as we work to get Peter Beinart on the line is, how do we respond? How should we be thinking about Donald Trump's accusations of NATO allies of not kicking in their fair share? First of all, let's disabuse one notion. This is not a country club. And shout out to Pod Save America for that analogy. This is not a country club where people kick in their dues into a common bank account and then that bank account pays it out. It's not like we're paying all the money into that bank account because that bank account doesn't exist. It is an alliance that has agreed to, if one of the nations is attacked, the other nations will come to defense of that nation. And in order to make that real, each of them pledges some percentage, some portion to actually have a military, so that's a real promise. Other nations, in the wake of the Cold War, have reduced their military spending to some degree. If there were a 2% of GDP expectation that military spending is, in fact, the ratio of how much is spent on military, this nation is spending closer to 4%. And given that our GDP is very large, that means we are spending an awful lot in real dollars. But again, it's not going to some bank account. It just means we're spending more on our military than they are spending on their military. It raises the question, it begs the question. It's now been raised in the Washington Post. It's been raised in the Atlantic. Is the better move for the United States to demand that every other NATO nation boost their military spending? Then we are still in the nuclear age, but we are not in the middle of the Cold War. Or does it make more sense for us as a nation to reduce our military spending? If we think it's unfair, well, thank you, Mr. President, for bringing that up. One way to address that unfairness would be for this nation to start taking advantage of a meaningful peace dividend, to spend less money on military and more money on things that provide value to the nation. How are we doing? Are we able to get Peter yet? Okay. Still waiting to get Peter Beinart on the line. Let's go through some of the things that are, in fact, happening in the world. Some of the stuff we're going to want to be talking about over the next 3 hours. I do want to talk a little bit about the American economy. We are in the middle of, and some would say towards the end of, one of the longest run-ups, one of the longest recoveries, one of the longest growth periods of the American economy in modern American history. I think it's now the second longest. And the question is, and have the physics of the American economy fundamentally changed? I would say almost certainly not. That means there will be a dip. at some time. Will it be soon? Will it be later? Nobody knows. I do have a question for you and for us to consider. What will be the elements that are most likely to bring it down? Maybe the most likely element to bring it down is the kind of thing we can't predict, the black swan, the unknown. But what are the clues, what is happening in the American economy now that we should be aware of that might be the thing that starts taking us down a little bit? Another thing we're going to want to talk about during these 3 hours is to watch our language. Why do we get together like this? I recognize that a lot of us who listen to this program, and thank you for doing so, a lot of us who listen to this program do so because we share values, because we share ideas, and it is useful to communicate with one another about things that we share. And one thing we can do is generate a more virtuous, a more pro-democracy, a more pro-social, a more compassionate, a more accurate, a more truthful vocabulary. Not the death tax, it's the estate tax, it's the inheritance tax, maybe the rich kids tax. Exploring for energy is what Frank Luntz wants to say. Drill, baby, drill is what they say when they're not paying attention. Opportunity and education is what they say instead of gutting public schools through voucher schemes. Tax relief is what they say instead of giveaways to the upper incomes. What are the other areas where we need to watch our language? We'll be talking about that on today's show. And again, the call-in number here is 202-808-9925. If you've got to watch your language for Anything Goes Friday, if you've got something we should be attending to. We're also going to revisit family values. The news comes at us so fast. It comes at us so fast that we want to provide a bass note to the cacophonous treble. And that bass note includes democracy, includes the middle class, includes saving the climate, and it includes identifying the hypocrisy, not merely the day-to-day and obvious and typical and banal and now boring hypocrisy of political life, but the stuff that is so pernicious, the stuff that so tears away the veneer of the movement that now runs the government of the country. Not a majority of the American people, mind you, but the government of the country. And that includes family values. To review this week, it wasn't that long ago we were talking about mother's milk, and we shouldn't forget. These are some of the things as we do the weekly recap. The call-in number again, 202-808-9925. You're listening to The Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff, joining you. Happy Friday.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jefferson Smith. Thanks for doing it.
Keep in mind, Donald Trump is basing most of his campaign on the fact that wages have been stagnant for 35 years. And he's saying it's because of Mexico. It's because of China. It's because of our trade deals. Well, to some extent it is, but it's also, and in fact, according to these guys at the Economic Policy Institute, largely because of the loss of unions in the United States, which is, the cornerstone of Reaganism. Destroy the unions, you destroy the funding mechanism for the Democratic Party, and they'll have to start getting in bed with banksters, which is exactly what happened. So anyhow, and so you would think that, if Trump really wants to restore the American dream and bring back the American prosperity we had in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, that he would be saying, hey, we need to go back to 35% unionization instead of the 6 or 7% we have right now in the private sector. Of course, he's not talking like that because he's a Republican. I mean, you just heard Harry Truman on this. So here are the key findings of the report. 1, for non-union private sector men, weekly wages would be an estimated 5% higher in 2013. This is the last year that they had numbers for that they could really crunch well. But it's, you can extrapolate it to today. For non-union private sector men, weekly wages would be an estimated 5% higher in 2013 if private sector union density remained at its 1979 level. For a year-round work, in other words, union density, number of people who are union members in the workforce. For a year-round worker, this translates to an annual wage loss of $2,700. For the 40 million non-union private sector men, the loss is equivalent to $2.1 billion fewer dollars in weekly paychecks, which represents an annual wage loss of $109 billion, just slightly more than the net wealth of the Koch brothers. I added. For non-union private sector men without a bachelor's degree or more education, non-college graduates, weekly wages would be an estimated 8% higher in 2013 if union density remained at its 1979 levels. For a year-round worker, this translates into an annual wage loss of over $3,000. And they continue through the list. You know, it's taking out these various slices of people. The degree of non-union wage decline reflects how much unionization has declined since 1979 among private sector men by 2/3, from 34% to 10%. That 10% includes government employees. Among women by more than 1/3, from 16 to 6%. And especially among non-college degree men by more than 2/3, from 38 to 11%. As unions have receded from the private sector, their effect on the wages of non-members percent of unionization has declined. And this is they go through more of the details and all this stuff, but this is something I have been pointing out since we started this program 13 years ago, that for every good union job in an economy, there's always a parallel non-union job that basically has the same wages and benefits because the unions set the floor. And as you destroy the unions, you destroy the floor. And now working people in the United States are basically falling through the floor. Wages have been flat since Reaganomics really took hold in 82, 83, 84. And they've actually declined, in particular for non-college educated men and for women since that time.
Hey everybody, I'm Jefferson Smith. This is the Thom Hartmann Program. We're working on making sure the phones work. I'm going to test them right now. I'm going to try to take Michael's call. Michael, can you hear me? We're going to try Chris. Chris, can you hear me? All right, we will work on getting the phone lines up. I started addressing a question that I don't want us to lose, and that is, how do we make sure we watch our language? The last time there was a significant resurgence of progressive energy was in advance of Barack Obama's election to the presidency. It was in reaction to George W. Bush's presidency and the invasion and occupation of Iraq. And during that time, the work of Frank Luntz, the Republican wordsmith, and the work of George Lakoff, the author of Don't Think of an Elephant, to some degree in response to Frank Luntz, became popularized. But in an era when the Twitter and Facebook and bot controversy and fake news has dominated our understanding of the process, and knowing that psychological studies suggest we can really only keep about 7 things in our brain at once, we can forget stuff. And we forget stuff all the time. I forgot until it was brought up last night. I didn't forget like I hadn't, if somebody brought it up, I wouldn't have thought it were to be true. But I had forgotten about Trump's attack of the Gold Star family and the American war hero, who was also the child, of immigrants. And it wasn't until the interchange with Trey Gowdy and the FBI agent just yesterday that I would have remembered. Another thing I think we have forgotten, though, is how much language, as we are on Anything Goes Friday and working to get the call machine working, that the battle over language As InfoWars said, they have a war on information. That's me saying it. They call themselves InfoWars, but I think they mean it. That they view words as a tool, not as a tool to identify truth, to figure out together how things ought to work and what is so and what's not so. But how are words used as a tool to gain and wield and maintain power? Examples that became famous included the death tax, included exploring for energy versus drilling for oil, included opportunity in education rather than getting public school funding. More recently, a little bit, not long after that, there was the transmogrification of teabaggers into the Tea Party. They called themselves the teabaggers. And then some people said, that could be viewed as kind of a rude word. And so they somehow appropriated and misappropriated one of the founding events of the nation, which wasn't merely, by the way, an attack on taxation. It was an attack of the absence of representation. It was an attack about democracy. It was a demonstration about how we are stronger together than we are apart. There are other examples. And over the next 3 hours, I would welcome calls at 202-808-9925 to offer other examples. But here are a couple others. Here's one I heard from a Thom Hartmann listener. We really appreciate the wisdom. We got a really smart audience. And a Thom Hartmann listener said, I think it was last year, who said, when the Supreme Court's talking about free speech, but when they're actually talking about commercial speech, we have to make sure we don't identify that as free speech. That is purchased speech. Free speech is what you do. Free speech is what a media outlet does as long as they aren't willfully or recklessly denying the truth. Purchase speech is when you buy an ad to promote something in your financial self-interest. Purchase speech is what politicians do in campaigns when they buy ads. And there is a case to be made that purchase speech can be regulated because money can be regulated. During the Bush era, the Orwellian words compassionate conservatism, clear skies initiative, healthy forests, no child left behind, essentially stuff that was exactly the opposite or darn nigh the opposite of what was intended. Meant to attract the middle while also pumping up the conservative base. Americans, by the way, would prefer greater energy efficiency to increased conservation because efficiency suggests getting more for less, while conservation has a tone of sacrifice. For that same reason, renewable energy is more popular than alternative energy. The United States is against mother's milk. This was a story that was published. This was a headline. The United States coming out against breastfeeding. But I would say that we've got to watch our language, that we've got to communicate with media outlets who have headlines like that, because it was Trump, not the United States of America. It was the Trump administration, if you will, the Republican Party perhaps. But it was not the United States of America that is opposed to mother's milk, that is opposed to promoting breastfeeding and its health impacts. Also to the media, we've got to watch our language. When we always use the term shooters. Shooter is the kind of thing that removes the tragedy. It's the kind of thing that one could imagine themselves in and takes away the humanity of the victim. Shooter's the kind of thing you do in a video game. Shooter sounds kind of fun. You could shoot skeet. If you kill people, you're a murderer. And if you kill a lot of people, you're not a mass shooter, you're a mass murderer. And you murder with a gun. And if you want to include the gun fact, that's cool too, or at least important. Another one that had just come up is court packing. Now, the court has already been packed by the Federalist Society, by gerrymandering, by voter suppression, by stealing the Neil Gorsuch seat. It has already been packed. Any discussion going forward of adding seats to the Supreme Court would be expanding the court. What are other elements? What are other ways that we need to watch our language? Where is the media getting it wrong? Where are places I'm getting it wrong? We're going to be talking about that and more on Anything Goes Friday. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jefferson Smith, and thank you so much for doing it. We appreciate it, and thanks to the team here. And thank you, Democracy. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jefferson Smith sitting in. It's Friday the 13th. The Knights Templar might or might not have gotten arrested today.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Elaine Pagel's book, The Gnostic Gospels. This is from chapter 3, God the Father, God the Mother. Unlike many of his contemporaries among the deities of the ancient Near East, the God of Israel shared his power with no female divinity, nor was he the divine husband or lover of any. He can scarcely be characterized in any but masculine epithets: king, lord, master, judge, and father. Indeed, the absence of feminine symbolism for God marks Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in striking contrast to the world's other religious traditions, whether in Egypt, Babylonia, Greece, and Rome, or in Africa, India, and North America, which abound in female symbolism. Jewish, Christian, and Islamic theologians today are quick to point out that God is not to be considered in sexual terms at all, yet the actual language they use daily in worship and prayer conveys a completely different message. Who, growing up Jewish or Christian tradition, has escaped the distinct impression that God is masculine? And while Catholics revere Mary as the mother of Jesus, they never identify her as divine in her own right. If she is the mother of God, she is not God the Mother, on an equal footing with God the Father. Christianity, of course, added the Trinitarian terms to the Jewish description of God, yet of the three divine persons, two, the Father and the Son, are described in masculine terms, and the third, the Spirit, suggests the sexlessness of the Greek neuter term for spirit, pneuma. Whoever investigates the early history of Christianity, the field called patristics, that is, study of the fathers of the church, will be prepared for the passage that concludes the Gospel of Thomas. Simon Peter said to the disciples, "Let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life." Jesus said, "I myself shall lead her in order to make her male, so that she too may become a living spirit resembling you males. For every woman will make herself male, who will make herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven." End of quote from the Gospel of Thomas. Strange as it sounds, this simply states what religious rhetoric assumes, that the men form the legitimate body of the community while women are allowed to participate only when they assimilate themselves to men. Other texts discovered at Nag Hammadi demonstrate one striking difference between these heretical sources and the Orthodox ones. Gnostic sources continually use sexual symbolism to describe God. One might expect that these texts would show the influence of archaic pagan traditions of the mother goddess, but for the most part, their language is specifically Christian, unmistakably related to a Jewish heritage. Yet instead of describing a monastic and masculine God, many of these texts speak of God as a dyad who embraces both masculine and feminine elements. One group of Gnostic sources claims to have received a secret tradition from Jesus through James and through Mary Magdalene. Members of this group prayed to both the divine Father and Mother. Quote, "From thee, Father, and through thee, Mother, the two immortal names, parents of the divine being, and thou, dweller in heaven, humanity, of the mighty name." The end of the quote from the prayer. Other texts indicate that the authors had wondered to whom a single masculine God proposed, quote, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness," in Genesis 1:26. Since the Genesis account goes on to say that humanity was created, quote, "male and female," some concluded that the God in whose image we are made must also be both masculine and feminine, both father and mother. How do these texts characterize the Divine Mother? I find no simple answer, since the texts themselves are extremely diverse. Yet we may sketch out three primary characterizations. In the first place, several Gnostic groups describe the Divine Mother as part of an original couple. Valentinius, the teacher and poet, begins with the premise that God is essentially indescribable. But he suggests that the divine can be imagined as a dyad, consisting in one part of the ineffable, the depth, the primal Father, and in the other of grace, silence, the womb, and mother of all. Valentinius reasons that silence is the appropriate complement of the Father, designating the former as feminine and latter as masculine because of the grammatical gender of the Greek words. He goes on to describe how silence receives, as in a womb, the seed of the ineffable source. From this she brings forth all the emanations of a divine being, ranged in harmonious pairs of masculine and feminine energies. Followers of Valentinius prayed to her for protection as the mother and as the mystical eternal silence. For example, Marcus, the magician, invokes her as grace, in Greek the feminine term charis. Quote, "May she who is before all things, the incomprehensible and indescribable grace, fill you within and increase in you her own knowledge." End of quote from the Gospels. In his secret celebration of the Mass, Marcus teaches that the wine symbolizes her blood. As the cup of wine is offered, he prays that grace may flow into all who drink it. A prophet and visionary, Marcus calls himself the womb and recipient of silence, as she is of the Father. The visions he received of the divine being appeared, he reports, in female form. Another Gnostic writing, called the Great Announcement, quoted by Hippolytus in his Refutation of All Heresies, explains the origin of the universe as follows. Quote, "From the power of silence appeared a great power, the mind of the universe, which manages all things, and is a male. The other, a great intelligence, is a female which produces all things." Following the gender of the Greek words for mind and intelligence, this author explains that these powers joined in union and are discovered to be in duality. The book, The Gnostic Gospels, by Elaine Pagels. Keep in mind, Donald Trump is basing most
Well, it's Friday the 13th. And you know how I know it? The first reason I know it is because my phone told me. The second way was because I was listening to the radio and they mentioned it. The third way is because the phone's not working. And this is a college show. Now, being live radio and having a talented team that is resourceful, we are still recognizing that it is anything goes Friday the 13th. And in order to deal with that, we are going to have alternative ways for you all to offer your comments and offer your questions. You can hit us on Twitter at Thom Hartmann. You can hit me on Twitter at Jefferson D. Smith. If you're watching or listening on YouTube, you can offer a comment there. Nate, is there any other way for them to submit to us a question or comment? They can drop by the studio, but I don't know that Sean wants me to give the address of the studio. Let's see what we've got already. And feel free to offer your thoughts there. Because one of the things I wanted to ask was, what are we missing? Let me ask Nate, are we able to play the Trey Gowdy back and forth, Peter Strzok back and forth from yesterday? Okay. We will be playing that in the next hour. I've been talking about watching our language. Would love tweets and comments in the YouTube feed and other ways to communicate to us information. What are the other ways that language is being manipulated to distract us from a pro-social, pro-compassionate, pro-democracy, anti-oppression movement? What are the ways that the forces of entrenched wealth are subverting the conversation so that we miss what's actually going on? I also want to say something to artists. I've been listening to the Beatles. There is some virtue in, I don't want to call it retreating, I want to call it advancing to the arts in times of pain and fear. But I want us to be cognizant of how we do that. And I want to even speak to the artists who are listening. Ultimately, to win a movement in favor of humanity in an era of money and robots, for that money and those robots to be under the thumb of, or at least in the ruling of, at the suggestion of, the influence of humanity, is going to require the arts. It's not just going to be talking heads like me subbing for Thom Hartmann. It's going to take people who help us understand the world, who reach us spiritually and soulfully and emotionally and musically and through story. And what story should be told? What music must be sung? I was listening to the Beatles and I was listening to the Rolling Stones, and it seemed that after the Vietnam War was starting to wind down, that the tenor of music changed. But something else occurred to me. It seemed that after the assassination of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., that the tenor of music also changed. That the Beatles started saying Om. They started saying let it be. The Rolling Stones started saying you can't always get what you want, but if you try, you can get what you need. Some of the best art of the era had a theme of resignation, had a theme of therapy through pacificity. I am suggesting that we need a different kind of art now, that we need to honor and appreciate and share and listen to and purchase and create an art of resistance, and an art of resistance that lasts. Because to me, we can't just let it be. We can't just say, oh, it's going to be okay. We'll get what we need. It'll be fine. Just say Om. And while I say we do need to say Om, we do need to find moments to meditate. We do need to find joy. We do need to cabin and to some degree limit the onslaught of information that stuns our senses and our synapses and our frontal lobes and has us retreating into the nether portions of our reptilian brain, that we need also to maintain vigilance, and we need to celebrate that vigilance. We need to inspire that vigilance. We need to stick with the idea that humanity matters, that democracy matters, that the only way that we can morally address our sins individually, from mine to maybe yours and certainly to this nation's, is to work to do better tomorrow, that we must bend the arc of the moral universe towards justice, and we can't just let it be. That the art of the 2020s can't be the art of the 1970s. We can't be 5 years away from disco and dancing the night away. We have to be resisting. We have to appreciate when even Star Wars gives us a hero, or if you will, a heroine, who fights oppression. And we need music to do similarly. What are you listening to? What are you watching? And if you're an artist yourself, how can we tell this story? How can we tell the story of putting up with what might be the fall of the American empire, but not just putting up with it? How can we communicate with the melting of the climate without just resigning ourselves to it? How can we sound the clarion call of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, and have that not merely seem like a principle that is supposed to be followed, or just, let it be and we're okay with? I say this to be clear, as someone who's not primarily a critic of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. I'm a big fan. They're geniuses, and we need geniuses. And geniuses aren't people who are anointed. They're people who work at stuff. It's not all natural brilliance. It's people with passion who are stonecutters, who go day after day and moment after moment. And yes, by the way, we are working to get the phones working. The thing that we need from our geniuses, from our regular people who are creating beautiful things, it seems to me, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me is beauty that keeps us going, that doesn't have us give up, that has us say, no, this is not okay, and it's also not okay for me to do nothing. I got to do a little bit. I have considered whether I should just be every single morning holding a sign, because I've never really been the person that seemed like, held a sign a lot. But maybe we need to each be holding some more signs and saying, this is not okay. In a movie not too long ago, or I should say not too long after the era I am talking about, after the assassination of the greatest progressive moral leaders of the previous generations, that there was a movie when the man said, I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore. And how did we react to the movie? Well, some people didn't take it anymore, and they continue to be activists. And to me, praise to the activists. But some people thought it was entertainment. That, oh, well, I saw the movie and I laughed at all the right parts and I agreed that I'm mad as hell and I didn't want to take it anymore. But I took it lots and lots of times. If we believe that democracy is not a spectator sport, if we believe that we have an obligation that at some moments, at some key moments, we end up getting the government that we deserve. And I don't believe we have the government we deserve right now. I believe we deserve better. But if at some level we think that these articles that get printed for me that I look at, that you can see on Free Speech TV and YouTube, and if I shake it by the microphone, you can hear, the things that come across my Twitter feed, that come across my social media, that come across my New York Times and Washington Post paid-for services because I appreciate their journalism. If that's just because I'd rather do that than watch Game of Thrones or watch the NBA Summer League, if that's the only thing that's going on, well, then I'm getting the government I deserve. Then this is how it's going to go. And this tragic and tragicomic reality show of a presidency is just this season's movie. It's a bad news movie. It's one that causes stress. But if that's all it is, then we are coming from a deep place of privilege and neglecting duty and neglecting the future and neglecting our community. And we aren't fighting against oppression, and we aren't doing nearly enough to address what I would say is our moral responsibility to address intergenerational misogyny and racism, that we can't just let it be. That we can't just hope that I'll get what I need. And yeah, I might. I was born in a middle-class family. We didn't have a lot of money, but I was able to go to college. And I was able to go to a good law school. And although I've had to borrow some money, I didn't have to be drowned in cascading debt. And I've never been pulled over just because of the color of my skin. And I've never been abused merely because the cultural misogyny that I live betwixt has decided that that's how it ought to go for the last centuries. And we can't just let it be. We're working to make sure the phones aren't just letting it be either, and we appreciate your phone calls and your participation. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith, filling it as best I can.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jeff. Hey, Free Speech TV, how you doing? What? You can't hear me? Oh, no, I can't hear you, but it's just fine. One of the things we were talking about is NATO. And let me, the Free Speech TV portions I enjoy. It is a chance for us to riff together. I've been struggling. As I mentioned on Wednesday, for those of you who are listening and watching, and I don't know if you're the same, that I grew up skeptical of anti-Soviet bias, not because I thought the Soviets were the good guys, but because it seemed bellicose. It seemed to be the rhetorical architecture that could undergird military intervention, or at least overspending on the military that might yield purposefully or even accidentally Holocaust. And the art of my youth included multiple songs called Forever Young, included one by Alphaville. It was about nuclear holocaust, including 99 Luftballons, which was about nuclear holocaust accidentally because of 99 red balloons ending up, because the song's in German, you might not know what the song is about. That's what it's about, is that the radar picks up 100 balloons, 99 actually, thinks that they are incoming warheads, and we launch warheads of our own. And it was on our minds. And during this time, when I was concerned about and fearful, I mean, we think about stress now, there was also fear and stress and tension that impacted lifespans during the Cold War. And I did not live through the Cuban Missile Crisis. I only was aware of its aftermath. But the idea then, the Soviets were the bad guys and the Russians were the bad guys, we need to be scared of them. Well, I was scared of them. But I also was nervous. And when I grew up to be at least sympathetic to and rooting for activists, I was rooting for activists that, hey, let's be a fan of glasnost. Let's be a fan of perestroika. Let's be a fan of Gorbachev and the efforts to democratize the Soviet Union and then become Russia. And it's making me a little nervous when my emotional reaction, and I can only guess how you're feeling, but I'm guessing there's at least a few people who have been feeling as I do, that my emotional reaction towards Vladimir Putin, my emotional reaction towards the Russian state, in feeling that they are not now only an enemy of this country, they are not only an enemy of the nation state of the United States, but also of democracy generally, and also of the idea of a more liberal, small L and big economy. And they are also an enemy of forces against kleptocracy. And it is making me nervous. The emotional reactions I am having are making me nervous. I don't have a conclusion to that, except that I wanted to make sure that our collective emotion doesn't lead us to something stupid, the same kind of stuff that I was concerned about when I was a little kid listening to 99 Luftballons. And how do we also do that while not being appeasers, while not merely avoiding what is actually happening, which is invasion of our elections, which is influence in Brexit, which is an effort to tear down international agreements. That's one of the things on my mind. Thank you for watching Free Speech TV. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. Where do I see it? It's Anything Goes Friday. We've got some of your comments from Bill Allman. I was once told many, many years ago to read Karl Marx once and then read it again, but this time very slowly and research the footnotes. Huge difference the second and third time around. He wasn't always right. Most definitely a man of his times and truly understood capitalism. And to understand capitalism, one must read and understand Marx's writings. Second, David Sens, I hope I'm getting your name right. In the 1980s, I was a machinist in a non-union shop. I understood then that I benefited by the existence of unions. Much harder now to get good treatment. Eric McDonald's. I'm reminded of my favorite lyrics from this 1970s protest song called Freedom Death Dance. Everybody wants happiness. Everybody wants peace of mind. Everybody says we should ignore the graves we dance upon. But I've really got news for you. There's only so much dancing we can do that would ban the bomb, feed the starving children, bring justice and equality to you and me. No amount of dancing is going to make us free. Amen, Eric McDonald's. Thank you for being part of the show and such a helpful part. That's what I'm talking about, as the kids say, or as the kids said when I was a kid. As far as broader economic theory, and as far as what is happening right now, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has trumpeted in her tweets and talks her economics degree. I'm not in a position to evaluate her as an economist, but I share a critique. And that is, if all we are civil rights fighting humanities majors, if all we do is make sure that we don't go too far backwards and hopefully continue to go forwards in our struggles over civil rights and fundamental humanity and identity. If that's the only way we express our virtue and work to bend the arc of history towards justice, then we are missing deeply important challenges. And those important challenges include that we have the biggest wealth disparities now since the Gilded Age. We might call it the last Gilded Age. That in this era of money and robots, we are losing humanity and purpose. And that won't be solved merely if we mildly diversify billionaires. That won't be solved if we continue this run to stress-inducing, life-shortening, democracy-ruining oligarchy. If that oligarchy has a somewhat varied set of backgrounds. That we have to have an economic system where there really is opportunity. Where there really is, heck, I'd even accept not just a safety net, but as Paul Ryan would like to say, a trampoline, but how is it actually a trampoline? How is it not just something that it seems like a safety net, but you just get stuck to it? Or the safety net has been removed so you fall to the floor, but then you realize the floor has been dropped. And that you are fed the cover of Forbes magazine, which tells us that the soon-to-be richest, and I'm using air quotes, self-made billionaire is a Kardashian. And I don't want to take anything away from Kylie Jenner's lip kits, but it is stretching it to some degree to call her self-made. They likened her to Mark Zuckerberg. I would say that we stood on narrower shoulders, but even he came from some degree of privilege. And you said, oh, I too could make lip kits. And I could be a billionaire in my 20s and be on the cover of Forbes magazine. If I had an older sister who was really famous, and parents who were rich, and parents who got famous during the OJ trial, and if I had TV shows that I didn't even have to be part of at the beginning, and then I too could be self-made. I could be a self-made billionaire and run for president if I inherited millions of dollars. If I had my school paid for me and I was handed a network of relationships with banks and lenders and construction firms, then you too could be self-made. That your sex tape could be really famous, and you could parlay that into additional reality shows. You could learn from the lessons of the brilliant Paris Hilton, and you too could be self-made if you were Hilton. And what I am saying now, one of the things I want to say in response, so I appreciate Eric's comment on art, that everyone wants happiness, but no amount of dancing is going to make us free. That we need to dance. That if our revolution isn't dancing, I don't want to be part of that revolution. But if that's all it's doing, then we are fooling ourselves. And as we decide what we are engaging in resistance for, I would say we are resisting against fundamental systemic immorality. Against democracy, recognizing, as democracy does, that the only thing that justifies rulership is the consent of the governed. And in economic power, that its best justification is to the degree that one has the capacity to get there also. Not to be born on the top of the ladder, climb up a little bit harder, a little bit farther, and kick it out from beneath you. That we can root for excellence. We can even listen to Nietzsche when he says, no, life shouldn't just be about happiness, it should be about struggle. And I would respond if he were alive, okay, but let's at least make sure everybody's got a chance to struggle in a way that will make their whole life a little bit better and not just a worsening struggle. when we are making the moral paragons, not only the people who get to buy stuff, but they're the people who get to be admired as people who are self-made. But who's the self that's making them? This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair chair, office chair. xchairtom.com is the website, xchairtom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at tomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Tom, THOM. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Living in the Chemical Age, How an Ounce of Prevention Can Protect Your Family from a World of Toxins by Dr. Janet Newman. This is from Chapter 1, How Did We End Up Here? In modern history, we entered the industrial age with the invention of steam-driven engines in the 1760s. In the technological age, the second industrial age, which took place between 1870 and 1914, we saw the advancement and expansion of both manufacturing and electrically powered systems. In the last quarter of the 20th century, we entered the information age when computers and the internet became the norm. Famous author and editor Leon Weitzeiler wrote a poignant book review in the New York Times on January 11, 2015, which said, quote, "Every technology is used before it is completely understood. There's always a lag between innovation and the apprehension of its consequences," end quote. While these great advances in modern history have made aspects of our lives easier and more convenient, a negative byproduct has resulted that we are beginning to recognize. It now seems that we are in the full-blown midst of what I refer to as the chemical age, an era in which our environments and bodies are the constant recipient of a deluge of chemicals, which are the unfortunate byproducts of our drive for advancement. This bombardment of toxic chemical exposure is silent and in most cases hidden, but it has the potential to be deadly. These chemicals are in our food and in our tap water, and on any given day we're exposed to dozens of toxins in our environment as well as in the products we choose to clean our homes and to use on our bodies. For the first time in human history, the New England Journal of Medicine tells us children born today will have a shorter projected lifespan than their parents, in large part due to obesity-related diseases, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, etc. They will likely get diagnosed with a disease at an earlier age and die earlier than their parents. Generations have always outlived the generation before them, but not anymore. People are getting sicker earlier. But why? A growing number of doctors and scientists now recognize many illnesses result from excessive exposure to toxic materials in our environment. The body tends to become inflamed and accumulate fat when storing excess toxins. This is a global wake-up call. How did we get to this point? And what can you do to keep yourself and your family safe? Many scientists and notable organizations, such as the Agency for Toxic Substances and the Disease Registry, have begun to study the impact of toxic substances on humans, which is an essential first step to fixing the problems we're encountering. For instance, for example, the incidence of colon and rectal cancer, once considered rare in young people, is on the rise in people in their 20s and 30s. According to the American Cancer Society, people born in 1990 have double the colon cancer and quadruple the risk of rectal cancer compared to someone born in 1950. This ominous trend is part of a larger trend toward increased rates of cancer in general. According to Cancer.org, today 1 in 2 males and 1 in 3 males have a lifetime risk of developing cancer. Cancer is widely known to be related to lifestyle and environment. The American Cancer Society says that only 5 to 10% of all cancer cases can be attributed to genetic defects. Almost 25 to 30% of all cancer deaths today are due to tobacco. As many as 30 to 35% are linked to diet and obesity, and 15 to 20% are due to infections, mostly liver cancer related to hepatitis C or alcohol use. The remaining percentage, somewhere between 5 and 25%, is mostly due to environmental pollutions, radiation exposure, and stress. The emerging science of epigenetics, which looks at how the environment impacts your genes, is showing us that toxins that can activate the genes responsible for causing cancer. The choices we make have a powerful effect on which genes are switched on and off, and ultimately on whether we get cancer or not. However, cancer isn't the only concern. The 2013 documentary film The Human Experiment points out that 7.3 million American couples have trouble conceiving or carrying to term. This is a 49% increase since 1988, with the biggest increase in women under 25. Autism and other childhood diseases are also on the rise. According to the CDC, in the 1980s, about 1 in 10,000 children had autism. In 1999, 1 in 500 kids had autism. In 2008, it was 1 in 88 kids. And in 2016, it was 1 in 68 children. It's 5 times more common in boys. The current figures for autism are 1 in 42 boys and 1 in 189 girls. In the past 50 years, childhood asthma has gone up 80%, leukemia 74%, ADHD 53%, and life-threatening birth defects are up 100%. Something in our environment must be playing a role in these staggering trends. Did you know that air pollution is rising in world cities at an alarming rate? According to the World Health Organization, outdoor air pollution has grown 8% globally every year since 2012, with billions of people around the world now exposed to dangerous air. Dr. Flavia Bustreo, Assistant Director General for Family, Women's and Children's Health for the World Health Organization, has said, quote, as urban air quality declines, the risk of stroke, heart disease, lung cancer, and chronic and acute respiratory diseases, including asthma, increases for the people who live in them. When dirty air blankets our cities, the most vulnerable are the most impacted, living in the chemical age. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jefferson Smith, sitting in. It is Anything Goes Friday. It is also Friday the 13th. And on this Friday the 13th, bad luck, or maybe something else, ended up robbing us of our means of communication, the telephone allowing your calls to come in here. And if you think it is merely that I have a lot to say, that may be true. But I'm also interested, and we are also interested in recognizing that this show is your show. Sure as heck isn't my show. And we want to hear from you. Fortunately, there are a couple other ways to communicate. One is the Twitter feed. You can hit Thom Hartmann. You can also comment in the YouTube if you're watching there. You can also tweet me at Jefferson D. Smith. You can also, did I get my text line? That might be a little dangerous. I'll give you my email address. My email address is jeffersonsmith@gmail.com. Yeah, if you want to text me, my mobile line is 971-275-2701. Hit us up. Here is from Kyle. As earlier in the week, you asked the worst possible thing the Trump administration could do. I thought of the Walter White meth lab in the White House basement. Trump has already been connected to child sex trafficking. All right, the Walter White meth. So would the Walter White meth lab in the White House basement, would that break down the red wall? Would that be something that got Donald Trump's support not only down to 40% or 36% or 42%, but actually would Fox News get off the Trump bus then? Another one, Music Resistance saying, listen to some 80s Reagan-era punk rock. That's a good one. I thought about that. I've thought a lot about it. And I don't count myself an expert, but I've thought a lot about it, about how art intersects with politics and resistance and democracy. And the challenge I have with too much of it, this includes stuff that I love, including 80 eras, punk era, new wave, and harder rock. It includes the Beatles and the Rolling Stones in the 70s and even the 80s, or the Rolling Stones. And it is that there wasn't enough connection to strategy. Now, that doesn't mean I'm suggesting that Paul McCartney needed to write George Lakoff's book. It doesn't mean that he needs to be going to the strategy meetings, but that we need to be interacting with more than just rage or pacificity. It needs to be vigilance. We need to be encouraging and sharing songs that hit us emotionally, because that is, of course, largely the purpose, that feed our souls, because whatever happens, we have one life to live, and let us love it as best we can. But also, I really like the one Eric McDonald's shared, because it was making the point that no amount of dancing is going to make us free. There's only so much dancing we can do that would ban the bomb, feed the starving children, bring justice and equality to you and me. Some other notes that we got in, and again, you can tweet me at Jefferson D. Smith. Want to say thank you and shout out to Todd Telford. Will the disgruntled Republicans in the Silent Center join with Bernie fans in fighting the conservatives who stole the soul of the GOP? If so, an inclusive America can be achieved, and true conservatives can take back the GOP. Democrats should help them do it. All right, I do want to address this one. How we think about political parties. The first thing is, my own take is, don't think political party first. You can vote political party first. You can go to your precinct committee. You can learn, as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the progressive celebrity of the month, and hopefully longer than that, has reminded, as the Koch brothers reminded, that in a first-past-the-post system, the best chance at meaningful change is to influence one of the two major political parties. You can be really cognizant of party politics, but the way that I think is best to understand them is as not empty, but nonetheless vessels. The Democratic Party was the racist party until it wasn't anymore. And now the Republican Party is the racist party. And that doesn't mean that every Democrat was racist, and it doesn't mean that every Republican is now. But where white supremacists found their best succor, where they found their best coalition, was, and we have to be honest about that, the Democratic Party in the 1800s and up to the Dixiecrats. And over the last 50 years, certainly since the Nixon Southern strategy, has been the Republicans. And that demonstrates once again that the first principle shouldn't be party. The first principle should be humanity. The first principle should be democracy. The first principle should be equality. The first principle should be nurture. The first principle should be anti-oppression. The first principle should be making the world a little bit better, having a little bit better opportunity so lives can be a little bit easier. And that those need to be the first principles, and then occupy parties to do that bidding. The first environmentalist president was Teddy Roosevelt. He was a Republican. The progressive era was built with Republicans. Women's suffrage was fought for by Republicans. The Civil Rights Act was fought for by Republicans. No modern Republican can, with a straight face, claim that mantle and get any credit. But it is, in fact, true that if we are going to change the nation, it is not going to require merely one party. It is going to require movements that cut across barriers, racial barriers, religious barriers, and political party barriers. And I say this as someone who has been a proud Democratic Party precinct person, somebody who sees the apparatus of the political party as a key thing, that even strengthening that apparatus, and it ain't that strong right now. You think it is because it's a big name, but mostly the Democratic Party is controlled by its financiers and the organizations that have direct membership and dough. And the DNC and the local state parties rely upon that. The local state parties, if you were to go to visit your county party, if you are a Bernie supporter and haven't done it before, you would find that the politics, setting aside if you disagreed on Hillary versus Bernie, if you started talking about climate change, if you started talking about progressive taxation, if you talked about the inheritance tax, if you talk about Black Lives Matter, you would find almost unanimous agreement that strengthening grassroots party infrastructure can be one of the smartest moves to use. But we can't think merely party first. You can tweet us at Jefferson D. Smith or at Thom_Hartmann. We got another one from Tyrant the Hawk. Perhaps the most perfect example of a modern artist of resistance is the band. Am I allowed to say P Riot, or do I have to just say P Riot? Pussy Riot, thank you. They went to jail for their beliefs in opposition. From Gladys Kravitz. What? A technical glitch during the Thom Hartmann show? Blame Comcast. If only Tom were there. She said was there, but it's were there. A condition contrary to fact requires the subjunctive mood. If Tom were there to talk at length about the nature of the problem he is ever powerless to remedy. And I'll say that because one of our previous listeners texted in encouraging people not to abide by the political movements that were begat from Karl Marx, but at least know the critique of capitalism that he offered. And what he offered was, if the promise of capitalism was everybody had a chance to get rich, what if the means of production, the means of getting rich, are held by too few? In an information era, and we'll talk more about this after the break, in an information era, how does a democracy work if the means of communication are held by a few? And if those means of communication that we have are ownership of radio stations, which progressives don't own, is cable companies who don't want net neutrality. How can democracy work if the means of communication aren't themselves democratic? That's not a Tom rant, but I'm Jeff, and this is the Thom Hartmann Show. And we're honored to be with you. The call-in number isn't working right now, but at Jefferson D. Smith is, and we're going to be back in just a minute.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is Jefferson Smith and Thom Hartmann Show. We'll be right back. A couple of texts coming over. Hi, Jefferson. This is from Lisa Y. What's up, Lisa Y? I wish we could hear your voice. We will on another day soon. Listening to Trump's press junkets, I am wondering why no one is calling him for what he is, an extortionist, making all kinds of threats to get his way. Isn't that the very definition of extortion? Pretty close. Extortion typically is threats of violence. It can be threats of other things also. If it's other things also, I think it's usually considered blackmail. Donald Trump, I didn't read Art of the Deal, and Donald Trump didn't write it. I don't know what it would have said about extortion or blackmail. But I do think there's at least a couple things going on. One is he can think of himself as a tough deal maker if he goes in and says something crazy. But also, and here's the lesson, and I will repeat it as many times as I'm allowed to do so. The bully pulpit works differently now. When the term was crafted, the bully pulpit meant radio, and it meant you got control or at least influence the newspaper headlines. later on and made most obvious in the Reagan administration, the bully pulpit meant that you could control the 24-hour news cycle. You could have a morning news briefing, and that could be the thing that everybody was talking about. And if you had elected an actor who was trained to be a gifted communicator and could read the lines, well, you had a first crack to read the best lines that were best for you. In the information era, in the social media era, it is different from capturing the newspaper headline on people's morning doorstep. It is different from the 24-hour news cycle of NBC, ABC, and CBS. You have to attract attention. And attention isn't only dominated by those outlets. Attention isn't only dominated by the power of the pulpit itself. To be a bully, you have to be bullyish, or at least you have to deliver the kind of content that other people share. And if you say something that other people are saying, well, it might not get retweeted that much. If you say something absurd, if you say something that gets other people to say, we can't say that, can we? That's not something we're supposed to talk about. And then we all retweet, look at this crazy guy, the crazy stuff he says. You're not supposed to say that, bad boy, Donald Trump, you floating baby over London. Well, then every time we've done that, we've allowed that to control the conversation. Not the morning newspaper headline, not the 24-hour ABC, CBS, NBC news cycle, but the feed on our phones, which is the modern day television. The curators who are saying, this is what you should look at because isn't it crazy? The addiction more and more of us have, including me. And when I get just a little bit of natural heroin coming out of my brain when my phone buzzes and I say, oh, I better look at it. I better check out what crazy thing has happened. And he can control the discussion. And as long, and so everybody who thinks that is all unintentional, oh, it's just because he lacks discipline. Well, he's managed not to talk about a lot of stuff. He's managed not to talk about the fact that he knew Justice Kennedy and Justice Kennedy's kid was his number one banker. He has managed not to talk about Stormy Daniels. He has demonstrated all kinds of message discipline. But he does control the conversation when he's crazy. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. It is Anything Goes Friday. And one of the things that went was our phone system. So if you're wondering why I'm talking a lot, it is not because I don't love you. It is because I do. And we are going to give you the very best we can, including responding to your excellent questions and comments, coming over text, coming in the YouTube feed, coming over Twitter. The easiest Twitter handle for me to check on my phone is at Jefferson D. Smith. We have got Courtney from Ukiah, California. I didn't even think I pronounced Ukiah correctly. You're doing a great job filling in. Thank you very much. Your energy, quite different from Tom's. Sorry about that. Is a welcome addition to the show. You're welcome for that. I have a great analogy I heard about the diversity of America I would love to share. I think you'd dig it. I didn't catch your email address, or I can send a lengthy text. It takes a little to unpack, but it's worth it. Oh, I recognize now you didn't necessarily want me to read that whole text on the air. That's fine. My email, I'll do my email address. That's easier. JeffersonSmith@gmail.com. We got Eric Murphy from Murphy, NC, which I think is North Carolina. Listen to early Metallica, any Megadeth CD. Go back and listen to Megadeth, Holy Wars. Thank you, Eric. I will. I appreciate it. No, like the punk stuff was real. And then how do we translate that into not just rage against the machine by not doing stuff, but sometimes wearing our mohawk on the inside? Sometimes raging against the machine by doing nerdy stuff, like going to city council meetings, like arguing for zoning so there's more housing so that more people can afford their rent, by hanging out in the legislative lobby because, by the way, the capital of your state legislature is your building, and you can go there as much as you want as long as the building isn't locked. And you can meet with legislators, and they will say yes to the meetings with you. How do we go from Megadeth to nerdy stuff? This is essentially the question that I wrestle with. This is the exercise in the intellectual, verbal, and strategic gymnasium amongst which I dance. And I appreciate the texts and the messages. Let's check the Twitter feed real quick. And again, you're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. One of the Twitter feeds here is at Jefferson D. Smith. I was talking about, and I think it was during the Free Speech TV portion, just prior, the means of communication, that it is kind of funny that the phone lines went down on Friday the 13th. Ha ha, Knights Templar, you got your revenge. Jesus, it wasn't our fault. Thom Hartmann is one of the good guys. But the idea that we have a precious few choices of how to communicate, and those precious few choices are not the platforms. There's lots of them. I'm littered with chat tools. I can do GChat. I can do Slack. I do Slack with my team. I can use the text message through my Apple as I plug various corporate brands. We still have radio and TV. We've got records. Heck, some newspapers even print paper. But the ownership of these things is in way too few hands. That we are being disguised, that the means of communication seem more small d democratic, but they ain't. That's why net neutrality was and remains so important. And it's why the irony, the synchronicity, the frustration of losing our means of communication, or at least one of those means, a couple of those means of communication on Friday the 13th is funny because of the Knights Templar, or ironic because of the Knights Templar. It also raises the point of why you are so important, of why building a community around values, around building a community around democracy, around communication, about the best idea wins. And while making sure we use every communication means necessary to build that community. Every time Comcast goes down, and I'm reminded that I have to say the name Apple, Facebook, and Twitter, and Comcast, and I have to promote the brands and offer faux gratitude to oligarchs. Every time I do it, it reminds me of why we have to fight against oligarchy, and why we need a love army, and why we need a coalition of the benevolently irrational. The good people doing good things for no good reason. Without you, democracy is not possible. With you, it is. And you are priceless. Definition of priceless, worth a lot, not for sale. I'm Jefferson Smith. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. Marcia Sherman, Citizens United. I've always opposed the naming of that SCOTUS ruling because I find it more appropriate to name it Corporations United. Worst law in history for citizens. Thank you, Marcia Sherman. The reason it's called Citizens United, maybe Marcia knows this, I can't tell from the tweet, is because that was who was being sued. Because that was who was under complaint. Because that was the party. It was a right wing. That was the party to the matter. Citizens United was the name of a right-wing group. And they won. And I agree that calling it Citizens United is a bummer, because if citizens are going to unite about something, it should not be to further offer secrecy and unlimited purchase speech to economic oligarchs who want to control the means of communication. That was a mouthful. David Cochran, anything goes Fridays. You touched a little bit on it Monday. The media and most resistors concentrate efforts with Congress. Do you think more should be said in the resistance about changing local houses? That has been a Republican strategy for decades. Yes, David Cochran, I do. David Cochran, I don't know if your family or friends tell this to you enough, but you are a genius, sir. A genius. A poet, a scholar, a saint. Someone who deserves praise and gratitude on a regular basis. You are absolutely right, and I could not emphasize it more if I came up with more adjectives on a moment's notice. That if we can change legislatures, legislatures draw lines. Those lines are determining congressional votes as much as or more than any other factor. A majority of the people did not vote in this Congress any more than a majority of the people voted in this president. And while Fox News won't tell it to you, there's a war on democracy, and we have anti-majoritarians now picking Supreme Court justices who will never have to be voted on. If we are going to build, we have to build from the bottom up, and the bottom up absolutely includes state houses. That's how I got into this mess. I didn't think I was going to do politics. I thought I was going to be a lawyer. Now I have the privilege, the pleasure, and the privilege of talking to you on this, the Thom Hartmann Radio Program.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. It's Anything Goes Friday, and anything is going.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from my book, Unequal Protection, The Rise of Corporate Dominance and the Theft of Human Rights. This is right after in the chapter where I lay out how the Supreme Court in 1886 actually did not rule that corporations are persons, even though the clerk of the court wrote that into the head note. And then we get into, where we got with this. This is page 109, the Republican conspiracy theory that empowered FDR. In the early 1930s, the stock market had collapsed and the world was beginning a long and dark slide into the Great Depression and eventually to World War II. Millions were out of work in the United States, and the questions on people's minds were, why did this happen and who's responsible? The teetering towers of wealth created by American industrialists during the late 1800s and early 1900s were largely thought to have contributed to or caused the stock market crash and ensuing depression. In less than 100 years, corporations had gone from being a legal fiction used to establish colleges and trading companies to standing as the single most powerful force in American politics. Many working people felt that corporations had seized control of the country's political agenda, capturing senators, congressmen, the Supreme Court, and even recent presidents in the magnetic force of their great wealth. Proof of this takeover could be found in Supreme Court decisions in the years between 1908 and 1914, when the Supreme Court, often citing corporate personhood, struck down minimum wage laws, workmen's compensation laws, utility regulation, and child labor laws, every kind of law that a people might institute to protect its citizenry from corporate abuse. Unions and union members were the victims of violence from private corporate armies and had been declared criminal conspiracies by both business leaders and politicians. It seemed that corporations had staged a coup, seizing the lives of American workers, the majority of voters, as well as the elected officials who were supposed to represent them. And this was in direct contradiction to the spirit expressed by the founders of our country. It was in this milieu that an American history book, first published in 1927 but largely ignored, suddenly became a hot topic. In The Rise of American Civilization, Columbia University history professor Charles Beard and women's suffragist Mary Beard suggested that the rise of corporations on the American landscape was the result of a grand conspiracy that reached from the boardrooms of the nation's railroads all the way to the Supreme Court. They fingered two Republicans, former Senator and railroad lawyer Roscoe Conkling, and former Congressman and railroad lawyer John A. Bingham. The theory, in short form, was that Conkling, when he was part of the Senate committee that wrote the 14th Amendment back in 1868, had intentionally inserted the word person instead of the correct legal phrase natural person to describe who would get the protections of that amendment. Bingham similarly worked in the House of Representatives to get the language passed. Once that time bomb was put into place, Conkling and Bingham left elective office to join in litigating on behalf of the railroads, with the goal of exploding their carefully worded amendment in the face of the Supreme Court. Thus, quote, Republican lawmakers, the Beards said, conspired in advance to give full human constitutional rights to corporate legal fictions. By a few words skillfully chosen, they wrote, every act of every state and local government which touched adversely the rights of corporate persons and property was made subject to review and liable to annulment by the Supreme Court at Washington, D.C. This conspiracy theory was widely accepted because the supposed conspirators themselves had said very publicly, we did it. Earlier, in an 1882 case pitting the railroads against San Mateo County, California, Conkling testified as a paid witness for the railroads that he had slipped the person language into the amendment, the 14th Amendment, to ensure that corporations would one day receive the same civil rights Congress was giving to freed slaves. Bingham made similar assertions when appropriate during his terms as a paid witness for the railroads. As a result of these assertions, through the late years of the 1800s, both of these two men were the well-off darlings of the railroad, basking in the light of their successful appropriation of human rights for corporations. When the Beard's book was widely read in the 1930s, it gave names and faces to the villains who had turned control of America over to what were then called the robber barons of industry. Conklin, Bingham, and Justice Waite were all dead by the time of the Great Depression and all judged guilty by the American people of pulling off the biggest con in the history of our republic. The firestorm of indignation that swept the country helped set the stage for Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, using legislative means and packing the Supreme Court to turn back corporate power and that corporate takeover, at least in part, and returning to average working citizens some of the rights and benefits that they had felt had been stolen from them in that Supreme Court head note in 1886. It was widely accepted that Conkling and Bingham had pulled off this trick successfully, purposefully saying person instead of natural person or citizen when they helped write the 14th Amendment, and corporate personhood was a fait accompli. It was done and couldn't be undone. The Supreme Court, confronted with the reality of the language of the 14th Amendment, had been forced to recognize that corporations were persons under the U.S. Constitution because of the precedent of that 1886 Santa Clara case. Senator Henry Cabot Lodge apparently ratified the coup on January 8, 1915, when he unwittingly promulgated Conkling's myth in a speech to the Senate about the 1882 San Mateo case cited above. And so anyhow, the book is Unequal Protection by me.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
What's up, family? This is Jefferson Smith. This is the Thom Hartmann Program. We are taking your tweets, sometimes your emails, and maybe at some point your phone calls. But right now, on this Friday the 13th, on Anything Goes Friday, one thing that went, the phone system. But our head is bloodied but unbowed. It matters not how straight the gate, a charge with punishments the soul. We are the masters of our fates. We are the captains of our souls. All right, some other folks have been saying stuff. Blue Krampus. What's up, Blue Krampus? Just got to have to plug Gary Newman, who came out with the song My Name is Ruin, inspired by 45 pulling out of the Paris chords. Enjoy. Thank you, Blue Krampus. You got another one? Got to watch The Americans, the best TV show for understanding what's going on. Thank you for that. Richard Adloff. Perhaps it is time to discuss the demand for Christian Sharia law and their push to remold governance into a debased version founded in representation of the Christian Book of the Dead. Here's my challenge, Richard. Because I am challenged by your text, I will have to do further research so I have an intelligent comment. I will have various comments. I will hope to make them intelligent and even not ignorant. And therefore, I will parse that further before responding. Jake Becker. Can't talk about music's influence on politics without mention of Floyd's Animals album, Pigs, Dogs, and Sheep. Thank you. Yeah, Pink Floyd doesn't get enough credit, either for being geniuses or for being, on the right side of history. So shout out to Pink Floyd. All right. Todd Telford, some more of Todd's phrases. Hey, Todd Telford, are you the one? Todd, are you the purchase speech guy? If so, you are a poet and a scholar. If not, you might still be one. Here's some more phrases. Vote Democratic for your children's children. Vote Republican for your boss's boss. I will say it again. Here's Todd Telford. This is the Todd Telford moment. I was going to call it minute, but it might not take a minute, or it might be slightly longer than a minute. Vote Democratic for your children's children. Vote Republican for your boss's boss. I went low on my register that time. Racism is cancer of the soul. Everyone has the cure if they have the courage and humility to choose it. Oh, I want to dwell on this. This is, for those of us who don't view morality as a static state, who don't view good and bad as permanent conditions. I have done ill. I have committed harm. I don't consider myself a good person. I just hope to be a better person. That as we think about racism, I mean, one of the challenges we get is it is one of the nastiest charges that can be thrown against another person. And if you say, sir, you are a racist, ma'am, you are a racist. Person of pronouns, so you choose yourself, you are a racist. The response almost always is no, how dare you? That's such a mean thing for you to say. And maybe something like, I have met several people of color and some of them even like me. I think it is more accurate and more healthy or healthier. We say, yeah, I'm really working at not being one. Is our nation racist? Yeah, but we really got to work on it being less so. Is the world misogynist? Yeah, and we really got to work to bend the arc of the moral universe towards justice. And to give Mr. Telford his due again, racism, a cancer of the soul. Everyone has the cure if they have the courage and humility to choose it. Another friend who said a similar thing that says it's most helpful we think of racism as a disease that each of us, probably or many of us, carry, and that we have to root it out. And we don't have, and in the act of rooting it out, we don't have to feel bad about ourselves. We only have to feel bad about ourselves that we aren't trying to root it out. Tom Seaborn, liberal media are only as liberal as their conservative owners. Thank you, Tom. Liberal media, by the way, here's my thought on liberal media. It's first of all, it's just a political lie. To the extent that that lie stuck, it has two pieces of truth that I would offer. One, maybe three. One, it tends to be urban. And so it tends to have cosmopolitan sensibilities. It tends to be a little quicker in how people are using the modern parlance. And therefore, big media can feel alienating to people in smaller communities whose networks are less cosmopolitan. Another way that the critique can be accurate is that journalists and people who learn lots of stuff and decide they don't want to spend their whole lives just, selling real estate, can have pro-democracy and pro-social values. That's true. It does not mean that their content benefits one political party over the other. And I think if you look since 1981, Democrats have only held the presidency in both Chamber of Commerce all at the same time for 2 times for 2 years in a row. 1981 was a long time ago. It is now 2018. So what is that? 37 years? Over 37 years, 4 years. This great liberal oppression of the right, these people that are being left behind, say InfoWars, Rush Limbaugh, Fox News, and the current president of these United States. They have been left behind in terms of political power wielded at the highest levels of both chambers of Congress and the presidency for 4 years out of the last 37. And that isn't, by the way, because a majority of people have said otherwise. No. Democratic Party has been a bigger party that whole time. Democratic candidates for president have won the popular vote more times than they've lost it. But one other way that I haven't heard talked about when the phrase liberal media comes up is the liberal tradition. That doesn't mean the same thing as the progressive tradition. That doesn't mean the same thing, certainly, as a Democratic big or small d tradition. Maybe, lots of overlap, though, with the small d. The liberal tradition being the tradition that says it is not a tradition merely of religious-based authority. The liberal tradition that reason is something that we should govern ourselves with. And the media, at its best, has been liberal in that sense. But it hasn't been liberal in the sense that it wants to fight against oligarchy sufficiently. Over those last 37 years, since 1981, we have also seen the erosion of the middle class, the melting of the planet, the stripping down of our democratic norms, infrastructures, and rules, and the biggest wealth disparities in 100 years. And if the big, scary media were on the case on that stuff, well, maybe it'd be different. Pat Rod, what's up, Pat Rod? The only thing Trump could do to lose the support of his followers is to shoot himself. Otherwise, they're with him no matter what. Here is R. Stefiak. At Ryan Throne, what's up with new indictments? Okay, I will talk about this in the next segment. There are 12 new indictments This is real-time stuff. You listen to the Thom Hartmann Show, we'll give you real-time stuff. And one of the real-time stuff is Bob Mueller just won indictments for 12 more Russian officials. Doesn't mean he can extradite them. Doesn't mean they'll ever face. If Donald Trump wanted to talk tough, he would let people in the room with him when he was talking to Putin. He'd say, you got to turn over these 12 people to actually face justice in the United States. And the reason we need to is because you, Vladimir Putin, say you didn't have anything to do with the election in the United States. Let us work with you on the investigation. And to work with you on the investigation, we don't want to give you our passwords so that you can further manipulate our technology. No, turn over the 12 officials. Let us interview them. Let us interview them. They're indicted, and we will give them, we're not sending them to Guantanamo Bay. We will give them the full protection of the United States legal system. They get to have a lawyer. They get to have their day in court. They don't have to speak against themselves if they choose not to, but let us have a chance. If the president really wanted to talk tough, if the president really cared about the truth, there's lots of stuff we could be doing. And there's lots of stuff he could be talking to the head of Russia about. And that's one of them. We'll talk more about that soon, I think. More from Tyrant the Hawk. Tyrant the Hawk, Trump would have referred to Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward as fake journalists. Yeah, you might be right. By the way, this is the Thom Hartmann Show. The phones are down. The spirit is strong. The mood is vigilant. The community is loving. The day is beautiful. The camera is working. But you might not be watching us on a screen. Tyrant the Hawk was saying, again, making the point, we got to listen to punk rock. I responded saying, love the point. How do we translate and channel the punk cool and politically nerdy? So the same way it's always been done through the teenagers. All right, I agree with you, Tyrant the Hawk. We got to talk to the teenagers, and we got to talk to the teenagers about translating their resistance into doing stuff. And you can text us at Jefferson D. Smith. You can also get us at Tom_Hartman. My email address is jeffersonsmith@gmail.com. What else do we got? We got Bill Allman. I said Bill Allman. Oh, here's Bill Allman again. Oh, no. And where'd they go? Oh, thank you. Joy Tao, profits over people reign today. Oh, there's Joy Dow. Profits over people reigns today. Predatory capitalism is destructive, not productive. Thank you for your note. Robert Stevader Jr., per the language issue, don't call them midterm elections, call them congressional elections. Thank you. Robert, you are a poet and a scholar. Congressional elections, midterm sounds like they don't matter so much. Here's what he says. Everyone hates Congress. We have a chance to change that every 2 years in congressional elections. Thank you. If you hear someone on local or national media say midterm elections, midterm of what? Just the president? That's dumb. That's not most of the things that get elected. It's not most of the decisions that get made. Midterm, always a stupid word. Robert Stevader, might not pronounce it that way, always a smart, virtuous, and wonderful person. Ever since he had this brilliant pronouncement, they are not midterm elections, they are congressional elections. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. It's also your show. And thanks for making the show a good one. We'll be back in just a second. I'm Jeff.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for video and audio archives. What's up, Free Speech TV? Here's one thing that I wanted to bring up. It is a Washington Monthly article. I might end up bringing it twice. I'm going to tease it now, and I'll bring it up more later. The headline is "Winning is Not Enough." Free Speech TV, y'all get extra credit. And that extra credit is I'm going to give you a little teaser what we're going to talk about in case you want to offer really intelligent thoughts that could help enrich the conversation. And I recognize the conversation is mostly my voice today because I can't put, and we can't put, your voice on air, but we can say it, we can use your words, and we can have the opportunity of having your insights shared. The easiest way probably is at Jefferson D. Smith on Twitter. If you don't have Twitter, you can email me, jeffersonsmith@gmail.com. If you don't have email, you can yell really, really loud, and at least your neighbors and office mates will hear you. Winning is not enough is the Washington Monthly article. Democrats are focused on taking back power, but our democracy depends on them keeping it. To do that, they have to start thinking differently. the fact that I offered, I have to give credit to Paul Glastries of the Washington Monthly, who wrote that article and reminded me that Democrats have only had the trifecta, only had the presidency in both chambers of Congress 2 times, 2 two-year terms in the last 37 years. And if we are going to save democracy, if we are going to actually beat back the rule changes that are making us an anti-majoritarian, not just racist, not just oligarchic, not just pro-rich and anti-poor, not just destroying the environment, not just anti-woman, if we're going to have a democracy that functions, if it's going to be roughly majoritarian, Democrats will have to hold power for more than just one spell. And that means they're going to start thinking differently. Grateful Dead, this is from Joe Eastman. Being a longtime Deadhead, I must shout out for a song that is just as pertinent decades later. Picture a bright blue ball just spinning free, dizzy with eternity, shooting powders back and forth, singing black goes south while white comes north, and the whole world full of petty wars singing, I got mine and you got yours. Yeah, shout out to the dead. Again, we've got to champion art. One of the reasons why they marginalize Hollywood and artists is because in order for oligarchy to control, it has to keep down truth and spirit. It's its only chance. There is not a majority of the United States of America, if given full information, if allowed to use their sober second sense, if allowed to communicate with their neighbors, including their neighbors that don't live next door or don't look like them. There is not a democracy that will vote to do deep harm over time to future generations. There is not a democracy. I even think of women's suffrage, and it's a small thing. And the danger of this fact is that it centers men, and that should not be the center of that story. But even in women's suffrage, in order to have women's suffrage recognized, there had to be a vote. And the only people who were eligible to vote were dudes. Even when we were beating back one of the most obvious, glaring, and stupid examples of an unjust American history, even a majority just of dudes, and in fact, almost entirely white dudes said, yeah, you're right, this is dumb. We got to do it better. And the only way to keep that spirit down is to tarnish the truth tellers and the song singers and the storytellers who can help us find that truth. And we got to champion that truth. And the thing I'm adding is we've also got to translate it to nerdiness. We got to be nerdier. This is a Thom Hartmann show. Fortunately, I'm somewhat of a nerd. We are joined by Skype, not a telephone, by Skype, by Luke Vargas, Talk Media News, talkmedianews.com. Luke, I've been talking a lot. If you would like me to ask a question, tell me so. Otherwise, you can just speak your piece for the entirety of the segment, and thank you for joining us.
Well, that's no fun. The give and take is the benefit of live radio. But I will just note that I'm joining you today from Estonia, the capital, Tallinn. I just arrived here several hours ago after being embedded with NATO troops in Latvia for the last day. And
are you bragging?
It wasn't. I was not firing any guns or launching any rockets. I did drive an Albanian drone, but that was about it. I will say.
Keep going. Do you want to talk about the Albanian drone, or do you want to move on?
No, let's move.
All right.
They probably wouldn't want me talking much about it. I mean, look, we obviously had the major NATO summit, and I still think European leaders are trying to figure out what the heck happened, and trying to. I think there's a broad consensus that the individual calculus that most leaders have been operating on, which is either flatter this guy in an attempt to get him to spare you humiliation, which has been Emmanuel Macron's tact, has failed. Trying to paper over the wedges that he's opening up within the alliance, as the NATO Secretary General has done, is also unproductive because it ignores the true and threatening way in which President Trump is undermining the alliance. And these leaders are also realizing that their own countries want them to defy Trump. That the saying in Germany, at least right now, is, whatever Trump asks of the Germans, the opposite becomes immediately the most popular issue in the country. And yet we emerged out of a very tumultuous 2-day meeting with most leaders still sort of stuck standing on the sidelines. And now that they're a little bit away from the meeting, senior officials I've talked to say this is not sustainable, that there's just no way we get to 2019 or to a NATO summit in 2020 with President Trump still in office and continue to go through this, that there is going to be a movement to stand up to him at some point. It's just about someone picking, selecting themselves to be the first one to do that. So anyways, it's been crazy. And my goal was to go and see NATO out in the field to see what they were doing, what its benefit is, instead of just hearing the political leaders in Brussels talk about what NATO is doing.
All right. So what are the could you have a read, being that you have now driven an Albanian drone, and that means you could have gotten into rooms that you couldn't fit yourself, or view little fields and courtyards that you were not invited into. Do you have some insight on how the NATO consensus is reacting, and how much the United States as a country and United Statesians as people are going to suffer for the vehement disgust of our current president?
Well, how Americans suffer is tough to read. I mean, American suffering is traditionally not why we, averting American suffering is not necessarily why we continue to prop up NATO. We're doing it for the benefit of close allies we supported for decades, and it would be silly to abandon them now. I mean, at least here in the Baltic, I can't stress enough the extent to which political leaders say we really want to continue our partnership with the U.S. They were the most vocal in opposing Soviet occupation. They were incredibly useful in pushing for the pullout of Russian Soviet troops from this region. It would seem silly now, after decades of doing all that work, to now sacrifice the defense of this region, which is possibly something Trump might do on Monday. And my challenge on social media the past few days has been to Trump supporters to say, pick a policy, something Trump might concede in Helsinki, and defend it now before he does it and then you start agreeing with it. Namely, advocate halting the enlargement of NATO, which is something the U.S. has been cheering on, but something Putin wants to end. Advocate suspending our military drills in the Baltic, which are seen as a very, very important deterrent to Russia. Advocate lifting U.S. sanctions on Russia. Advocate recognizing Crimea, or advocate abandoning the Syrian Kurds and going into some sort of counterterrorism partnership with the Russians in Syria. I mean, these are all things that Putin has been asking the United States to do, and I would not be surprised if Trump picks from that menu of policies and does any one of them. And finally, I guess just one comment on NATO, because I guess we got about 2 minutes left, Trump has been asking for a major military spending increase, and everyone I've talked to has said yes, that can be done. A lot of countries are continuing to increase spending. It's about, I think, 4% annual increases at the national level every year. They're not going to get to 2% quickly, all of these countries. They're definitely not going to get to 4%. And the point here is that these countries can't absorb military spending like that. I mean, it would just like Los Angeles, where, when it rains, all of the plumbing is designed to get the water to the ocean right away. Instead of soaking it into the ground, these militaries in many parts of Europe would not know what to do if they had to dramatically increase military spending. Much better to focus on spending more wisely, telling countries to buy equipment together so that they can get kind of bulk pricing, spend better, spend more wisely, buy American, but don't necessarily just waste your money throwing it away for some top dollar amount. And those are not things Trump is advocating.
Yeah, and before we get kicked off the air and go to break, is there a chance of backfire? We've seen that support for the idea of immigration has increased during the Trump administration after all of his vehement attacks on immigration. Is there a chance within Europe, within NATO allies, that Trump's attacks on NATO build support for NATO in those nations? Is it also possible that his trumpeting of greater military spending by them starts changing the conversation to, well, hey, yeah, we could make it fair by the United States reducing our military spending. Any chance of backfire?
I'm concerned because typically, averting a decline in public opinion overseas would be reason enough not to pursue a policy. Trump doesn't care about that, and he has trade and tariffs as leverage.
Luke Vargas got kicked off by Skype. Luke Vargas, Talk Media News, talkmedianews.com. Smart dude. Good looking, too, if you can see his picture. Thank you so much for being with us, Luke. We're going to be right back. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair chair, office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beats. More information is available over at thomsbeets.com, thomsbeets.com, or by calling 800-568-9889.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Thom, Thom. The Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from the Strip and Flip Selection, as opposed to Election, of 2016, 5 Jim Crows and Electronic Election Theft by Bob Fitrakis and Harvey Wasserman. This is from the chapter Part 1, page 15, Strip. The foundation of election theft is the manipulation of race as a divide and conquer strategy. It began with the first Jim Crow chattel slavery. Slavery in various forms has existed since the dawn of time, but in the colonies of British North America and then in the United States, it took on a uniquely virulent incarnation. Chattel slavery was, of course, a horrific, brutal labor system designed primarily in the American South to power a network of plantations that produced cotton, tobacco, indigo, rice, and other hot weather crops that could be grown in large fields. But it had a larger purpose here. Our peculiar institution, how the founders referred to slavery, was meant to divide black laborers from white in a caste system that would guarantee that they would never unite in rebellion. As we'll see, this originated with the infamous Bacon's Rebellion of 1675 in Virginia, in which indentured servants of both races joined forces. Plantation owners vowed to make sure that that never happened again. When the United States became an independent country, plantation owners also vowed to secure political benefits from their slaves. Thus, they wrote into the Constitution the Three-Fifths Clause that gave slave owners additional representation for their slaves, even though those slaves could not vote. That additional vote count guaranteed that every president from Jefferson to Lincoln either owned slaves or his vice president did, and that the Congress was strongly controlled by slave owners right up to the outbreak of the Civil War. After the Civil War, with formal slavery abolished, a Jim Crow system of racial segregation overtook the South. Enforced by the Democratic Party and its Ku Klux Klan terror wing, white landowners updated the realities of slavery to again keep blacks and whites apart. The roots of racism since 1865 has been the treatment of legally freed African Americans as something less than human, guaranteeing all whites a sense of superiority and an economic leg up. When the populist and socialist movements that campaigned most powerfully from the 1880s to the 1920s worked to overcome this separation, they were hammered by the court and electoral systems through a series of stolen elections and twisted race-based legal decisions, and the fusion of the Democratic and Republican parties in the 1917 municipal races in the Northeast. Confirmed by the Supreme Court in the 1890s, this updated Jim Crow caste system again guaranteed that blacks in the South and parts of the North would not be allowed to vote, and that they would be carefully divided from whites by caste as well as class. Since 1970, the primary weapon for suppressing the minority vote has been the third Jim Crow, the drug war. In the tradition of Bacon's Rebellion and the populist socialist upheavals, blacks and whites once again began to unite during the civil rights and anti-war movements of the 1950s and 60s. In response, Richard Nixon's Republican Party invoked the divide and conquer war on drugs. Confronted with the liberalization of the Southern Democratic Party, Nixon feared that black votes might remake America's political map. In Republican eyes, there was only one solution: disenfranchise the African American population, along with young and Latino voters who were leaning strongly to the left. In 1972, Nixon pointedly ignored a powerful report from his own Blue Ribbon Schaefer Commission on drug use and escalated the attack on marijuana and other drugs. In the 45 years since, a staggering 41 million Americans have been arrested for pot or other controlled substances. That's a number of human beings that exceeds the populations of more than 150 other countries worldwide. It has left the United States with the largest prison population in the history of the modern world, while having little or no impact on the actual use of drugs. As Michelle Alexander has shown in her landmark book, The New Jim Crow, the majority of those incarcerated have been black and Latino, with a devastating impact on our elections. Millions of these mostly young, mostly male citizens have been stripped of their right to vote, as well as their ability to maintain families, obtain work, and meaningfully participate in the political lives of their communities. All this has been by design. Once again, a new Jim Crow policy has been delegated by a ruling elite to strip our non-white population of its ability to exercise its fair share of power in our electoral process and to unite with whites in political action. In the 1890s, rising industrial interests committed the nation to a fourth Jim Crow, a course of race-based global empire. The U.S. already had a history of foreign intervention, dating to Thomas Jefferson's 1803 use of our fledgling Navy to fight pirates along the coast, the shores of Tripoli, of what's now called Libya. That was followed by the conquest of the North American continent with genocidal warfare used against the indigenous peoples who had lived here for 20,000 years. By the 1890s, when the frontier consumed, America's giant corporations began to expand overseas. They started with Hawaii, a constitutional monarchy, and then pushed into Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines, and beyond. And in all cases, these interventions involved the white-ruled U.S. interfering with the political systems of non-white countries. In discussing this fourth Jim Crow, we include an extensive, though not complete, list of these interventions. It underscores the reality that our own political system has become an imperial juggernaut, with the inevitable blowback bound to obliterate any residual pretense to real democracy at home. Generally, there's been an attempt to portray these interventions as benign, meant to bring democracy, progress, and the Christian faith to third world nations. In fact, they've been largely economic in purpose, a dollar democracy to grab other people's resources. The Strip and Flip selection of 2016 by Bob Petrakis and Harvey Wasserman. Hey, Steve, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. Vulnerable are the most impacted.
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call. Last night, Bernie Sanders was on Rachel Maddow, and he did something and said something which I really appreciated, and that was a kind of talked about strategy, and that the resistance is really important. It's a critical part of the strategy, but it comes with...
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, family. This is Jefferson Smith. This is the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm sitting in. Phones are down. Spirits are up. Democracy has hope, largely because of you. If you do have things that you want to say, you can tweet at me. I am at Jefferson D. Smith. You can also find us on YouTube And subscribe to Tom on YouTube. It's a good way to watch the show. Lots and more people are doing it. Lots of people say it's a good way to do it. You can also check us out on radio stations around the country. I got a question from her is Abolish ICE. And she had several points, but one of them, what are your thoughts on people being vegan versus eating meat? You have asked this question at a great and terrible time, Abolish ICE. I am having a moral struggle about it, literally this week. I am someone, when I grew up, particularly like in my high school and college years, kind of a jerk. Got in fights. Used to headbutt people on a basketball court. Hit a girl one time. I've done stuff I'm not proud of. And as I recognize that our only salvation is in trying to be better, I've tried to work on my own toxic masculinity and work on my own contribution to a culture of violence and oppression. And literally this week, it's not the only time I thought about it, but this week I've been thinking about it a lot more. And I listened to an interview with a woman who wrote the book, what is it? Why Do We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows? By the way, I love meat. I worked as a cattle hand. And I'm a big guy. I'm about 6'4", weigh over 230 pounds. And I like meat. And I love my dog. And I have not yet found a moral principle that I am willing to, that I'm comfortable embracing, that helps me differentiate between my genuine love of animals, including my own animals, and my willingness, even glee and delight in consuming them. I don't have a moral principle. It is where I've landed for today is to try to eat a lot less meat. I haven't yet gone vegan. I'm not yet ready to make that pledge because I don't think I'd be able to keep the promise. Not yet, at least. But I have something else to say about vegans. Thank you. Not only thank you for not contributing as much to climate change as I do, not only thank you for demonstrating a more consistent moral principle, but also just thank you for being kind of cool about it. Because I have to think, if I were a vegan, if I had landed firmly on the notion that I am dancing with now, that my consumption of meat is cruel, is mean, is contributing to bad stuff, then if I landed there, I think I would talk about it all the time. I think I would be like the evangelical Christian who is constantly asking people to find Jesus. I would be telling people every time they had a slice of bacon, do you know that pigs can see themselves in the mirror? Most animals can't. Pigs can. Enjoy your bacon. I'd be telling stories about how cows can be really nice and can bond with other living things. And the fact that the vegans I know don't do that all the time, it like demonstrates they're like better people than I am. Because they like let us get away with something that is somewhat questionable for our health, for the health of our country, for the health of our climate, and morally. So I don't know, but Abolish ICE, that's my answer to your tweeted question. Marcia Sherman tweeted in, if you didn't see U.S. Representative Bill Pascrell, 9th District of New Jersey, speech yesterday reading directly from the Steele dossier, please take the time to hear it. A wealth of info in the past 8 years, the Trump-Russia connection, soon to be made public. Thank you very much, Marcia Sherman. You can tweet me at Jefferson D. Smith. Pat Mobley, thank you, Pat Mobley. Somebody saying, please don't read my text on air. Okay, I won't. But I appreciate the kind thing that you said. Susan Johnson, supposedly RNC was also hacked, but nothing leaked. Could Russia have a lot of goods on them? This is a good question, Susan, that there are lots of steps in this. And because there are lots of steps, it makes it feel even more obvious to me, or at least, I'll go the other way. It feels so fishy for anyone to say, well, it was sort of a coincidence. It is hard for me to understand sometimes how the red wall holds together, how the folks who are fighting for an non-majoritarian, anti-majoritarian government, being fed information by a legion of talk radio, which helped begat, which helped foment and generate the listening group that became the viewer group of Fox News that Barry Diller helped exploit. It is hard for me to understand how the red wall is able to maintain the cognitive dissonance, and that's despite understanding and knowing a good deal of psychology. It is hard for me to understand how they maintain all of the bricks in that red wall. How could it be all a coincidence? Holy mackerel. I got another good Grateful Dead. I can't read all the lyrics of Grateful Dead, in part because I just think I would be doing damage. Maybe, I don't know if there'd be licensing concerns, but I also just doing damage to their art form. I can do snippets. Non-judicial precedents from Sunday Balander. Everyone is complaining about the courts and their arbitrary rulings. Why is there never any mention of non-judicial precedents? Little seemingly unimportant issues in little backwater towns are increasingly used to manipulate and influence the higher courts. When the powers that be are facing unpopular issues, it is easier to go through the back doors rather than head on. Scalia was touted as a strict constitutionalist. Behind closed doors, he was teaching the up-and-comers how to circumvent the law. Non-judicial rulings was one of those avenues. I have firsthand experience with setting precedents. Because of me, there are 2 on their list of quotable rulings. I no longer dabble in activism. When I asked for their support, all I got was join our mission, support our causes. So I will. The email goes on. I will pause there. This one is getting obvious, right? The Federalist Society, Scalia, Thomas, and now almost majority, and maybe soon to be majority of the court, if Susan Collins doesn't listen to her conscience, is been making the case they are strict constitutionalists. That was a farce from the beginning, and it is more obviously a farce now. Here is the example to me that is most clear and become even clearer. It is historical. This court is looking more and more like the Lochner court, the Lochner era court, which came up with substantive due process. The idea of the due process clause of the Constitution had elements within it that would preclude majoritarian, congressional, small d democratic government power. Where Article 3, the article of the Constitution that has the Supreme Court in it, interpreting the Constitution to say the due process clause limits congressional article, Article 1. And that limitation was called substantive due process, and it became discredited. The FDR tried to expand the court. He was accused of packing the court. My argument now is the court has been packed. There is a fair argument now about whether it should be expanded. Its number of seats is not in the Constitution. It could be 12. That is what most juries are. And FDR was getting limited in New Deal reforms by the Lochner era court, by substantive due process, by conservative judges saying, aha, there. What we are seeing now, there was no constitutionalist honor or precedential deference to the Voting Rights Act when they got rid of it. There was no deference to Congress, to the limited role of courts when they stripped union rights just recently. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. You're you. And thanks for being here. Thank you, Free Speech TV. Here is, Nate Atwell has played for us in our breaks, Les Miserables. Nate, we are not allowed to play the whole song, but I believe we are allowed to play a brief portion of it. Could we play just a little bit as you were dazzling us before? Is that possible?
Not a legal expert.
No, we can play 20 seconds. I mean, are you technologically capable of doing that? Are we able to do that?
Technologically.
But you're scared?
You're on the file.
If I click this, it's going to play? All right. I didn't think I got to control anything like that. Well, while we're doing that, we were going to play the One Day More song. I realize now he's thinking I'll play it off my laptop. Maybe I will. Tomorrow is Bastille Day. Bastille Day, the 14th of July, 1789. It was a turning point in the French Revolution. And remember, France is our oldest ally. We have a special relationship with the Brexiteers, but we wouldn't probably have a country if it weren't for the French. And the French wrestled with their own liberation, their own setting aside of monarchy, and Bastille Day, the storming of the Bastille, celebrated the unity of the French people on the 14th of July, the very next year in 1790. And on Friday the 13th, as we battle in favor of democracy, we can remember that one day more, it is Bastille Day. Here's from Les Perkins. Many or most of us get mailers from the Democratic Party organizations asking for donations. Don't throw them away. I answer every one of them. I don't always make contributions, but I ask them to be progressive. I also enclose a graphic. He responds to the DNC. Courtney Wagner, the diversity of America. Talk radio junkie, she says. The ideas were deconstructed as a salad bowl versus a pot of soup. Speaking of the two predominant opposing views in America today, one that we should build walls, lock up shop, and keep America white. The other that we are better for the diversity of our people. Now consider a pot of soup, the attentionate care it takes to build. One can't simply throw away every vegetable, set to simmer, and walk away. The result would be a textureless, gelatinous disaster. Thank you for your support of a cup of soup, for the melting pot of America, for us not only building walls, but building bridges and making soup. We appreciate it. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. Hey, everybody. This is Jefferson Smith. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Thanks for doing it. Thanks to the community that is building long-term vigilant resistance, and not only resisting, but being a positive force for democracy, love, and compassion. Shout out to Van Jones, #LoveArmy. A topic I wanted to get to today was the, let's call it, electric testimony of Agent Strzok and his interchange and back and forth with Trey Gowdy. The background of this, for people who don't watch or listen to a lot of right-wing media, might be lost on you. The background is that the whole narrative, the Trump and the Red Wall narrative, is that the Russian investigation is entirely trumped up by the deep state in order to take down a president they don't like, because there's a liberal conspiracy that is oh so very powerful. The Democrats have been unable to hold a trifecta of power for anything but 4 years out of the last 37. And that they, the deep state, were exposed by text messages of Agent Strzok, where he offered criticism of Donald Trump. He also, by the way, offered criticism of Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton, and apparently voted for John Kasich of Ohio for president. And he was critical of Donald Trump. And Trey Gowdy and the rest of the congressional committee called him in, and they were going to get him. They were going to get him and show how he was proof The deep state was out to get Trump. And here is that interchange, and here is Agent Strzok.
Response to a series of events that included then candidate Trump insulting the immigrant family of a fallen war hero. And my presumption, based on that horrible, disgusting behavior, that the American population would not elect somebody demonstrating that behavior to be president of the United States. It was in no way, unequivocally, any suggestion that me, the FBI, would take any action whatsoever to improperly impact the electoral process for any candidate. So I take great offense and I take great disagreement to your assertion of what that was or wasn't. As to the 100 million to 1, that was clearly a statement made in jest and using hyperbole. I, of course, recognize that millions of Americans were likely to vote for candidate Trump. I acknowledge that is absolutely their right. That is what makes our democracy such a vibrant process that it is. But to suggest somehow that we can parse down the words of shorthand textual conversations like there's some contract for a car is simply not consistent with my or most people's use of text messaging. I can assure you, Mr. Chairman, at no time in any of these texts did those personal beliefs ever enter into the realm of any action I took. Furthermore, this isn't just me sitting here telling you, you don't have to take my word for it. At every step, at every investigative decision, there are multiple layers of people above me, the assistant director, executive assistant director, deputy director, and director of the FBI, and multiple layers of people below me, section chiefs, supervisors, unit chiefs, case agents, and analysts, all of whom were involved in all of these decisions. They would not tolerate any improper behavior in me any more than I would tolerate it in them. That is who we are as the FBI. And the suggestion that I, in some dark chamber somewhere in the FBI, would somehow cast aside all of these procedures, all of these safeguards, and somehow be able to do this is astounding to me. It simply couldn't happen. And the proposition that that is going on, that it might occur anywhere in the FBI, deeply corrodes what the FBI is in American society, the effectiveness of their mission, and it is deeply destructive.
What got cut off was the applause. He was done talking. That was Agent Strzok making two arguments. One, yeah, I thought when Donald Trump was talking trash about Gold Star family, that sucked. But I wouldn't let that infect me doing my job as a member of the FBI. That's not how I've lived my career, and I wouldn't accept it from other people. But even so, I am one piece of this bureaucracy. I'm one piece of the analysis that is happening. I am one gear in the machine, and do you really think that everybody above and below, from supervisors to section chiefs, would have encouraged me or allowed me to somehow disrupt the entire apparatus to lead and control the deep state? It's another lesson. Hearings that are televised are good for truth. When Hillary Clinton had a chance to answer questions about Benghazi, it was good for truth. When Agent Strzok got a chance to, what's up, Dave? It's good to see you. Not everybody, you're missing something if you're not seeing it on the screen, because the talented Dave Fulton is here trying to rescue it. He is a brilliant, wonderful soul. The exercise of congressional hearings, when we really want the truth to come out, are good. Particularly what you've got is questioners that are trying to prevaricate. And you have people who are testifying who are smart, who are articulate, and who have facts to offer. Open hearings have benefit. Open hearings have benefit. One of the challenges is that Strzok's little answer there, stuff that members of Congress, Republican members of Congress said, that got played on Fox News and tweeted out all over the place. But that little piece, well, what I saw more of when I was looking this morning was just Trey Gowdy talking, and then not wanting to say that Trey Gowdy got his lunch handed to him when he was trying to bully an agent of the FBI. An agent of the FBI, of course, wishes and said that he regrets sending any text messages, but reminding that it doesn't really have anything to do with whether or not the president was in cahoots with the Russian state or agents of the Russian state to subvert democracy in the United States. It has nothing to do with that. It is merely a distraction. It is merely a way to maintain the red wall. It is just a story to tell. And we don't want to build that red wall. We do want to build bridges, or, listening to Courtney, make some soup. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. We'll be back. We're taking a break. And by the way, thank you to the sponsors. And thank you to the members of our nonprofit stations. You make this stuff possible. Appreciate it.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
You listen to the Thom Hartmann Show. You can hit us on Twitter at Tom_Hartmann or at Jefferson D. Smith.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Robert Wright's brilliant new book, Why Buddhism is True, The Science and Philosophy of Meditation and Enlightenment. This is from the first chapter, which is titled Taking the Red Pill. We're on page 3. He's talking about the movie The Matrix. Remember Nemo and all that? I saw The Matrix in 1999, right after it came out, and some months later I learned I had a kind of connection to it. The movie's director, the Wachowski siblings, had given Keanu Reeves 3 books to read in preparation for playing Neo. One of them was a book I had written a few years ago, earlier, The Moral Animal, Evolutionary Psychology and Everyday Life. I'm not sure what kind of link the directors saw between my book and The Matrix, but I know what kind of link I see. Evolutionary psychiatry can be described in various ways, and here's one way I had described it in my book. It is the study of how the human brain was designed by natural selection to mislead us and even enslave us. Don't get me wrong, natural selection has its virtues, and I'd rather be created by it than not be created at all, which, so far as I can tell, are the only 2 options this universe offers. Being a product of evolution is by no means entirely a story of enslavement and delusion. Our evolved brains empower us in many ways, and they often bless us with a basically accurate view of reality. Still, ultimately, natural selection cares about only one thing, or I should say, cares in quotes about only one thing, since natural selection is just a blind process, not a conscious designer. And that one thing is getting genes into the next generation. Genetically based traits that in the past contributed to genetic proliferation have flourished, while traits that haven't have fallen by the wayside. And the traits that have survived this test include mental traits, structures and algorithms that are built into the brain and shape our everyday experience. So if you ask the question, what kinds of perceptions and thoughts and feelings guide us through life every day? The answer at the most basic level is not the kinds of thoughts and feelings and perceptions that give us an accurate picture of reality. No, at the most basic level, the answer is the kinds of thoughts and feelings and perceptions that helped our ancestors get genes into the next generation. Whether those thoughts and feelings and perceptions give us a true view of reality is, strictly speaking, beside the point. As a result, they sometimes don't. Our brains are designed to, among other things, delude us. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Some of my happiest moments have come from delusion, believing, for example, that the tooth fairy would pay me a visit after I lost a tooth. But delusion can also produce bad moments, and I don't just mean moments that, in retrospect, are obviously delusional, like horrible nightmares. I also mean moments that you might not think of as delusional, such as lying awake at night with anxiety, or feeling hopeless, even depressed for days on end, or feeling bursts of hatred toward people, bursts that may actually feel good for a moment but slowly corrode your character, or feeling bursts of hatred toward yourself, or feeling greedy, feeling a compulsion to buy things or eat things or drink things well beyond the point where your well-being is served. Though these feelings, anxiety, despair, hatred, greed, aren't delusional the way a nightmare is delusional, if you examine them closely, you'll see that they have elements of delusion, elements you'd be better off without. And if you think you would be better off, imagine how the whole world would be. After all, feelings like despair and hatred and greed can foster wars and atrocities. So if what I'm saying is true, If these basic sources of human suffering and human cruelty are indeed a large part of are in large part the product of delusion, there is value in exposing this delusion to the light. Sounds logical, right? There's a problem that I started to appreciate shortly after I wrote my book on evolutionary psychology. The exact value of exposing a delusion to the light depends on what kind of light you're talking about. Sometimes understanding the ultimate source of your suffering doesn't by itself help very much. Let's take a simple but fundamental example: eating some junk food, feeling briefly satisfied, and then only minutes later feeling a kind of crash and maybe a hunger for more junk food. This is a good example to start with for two reasons. First, it illustrates how subtle our delusions can be. There's no point in the course of eating a six-pack of small powdered sugar donuts when you're believing that you're the Messiah or that foreign agents are conspiring to assassinate you. And that's true of many sources of delusions that I'll discuss in this book. They're more about illusion, about things not being quite what they seem, than about delusion in the more dramatic sense of the word. Still, by the end of the book, I'll have argued that all of these illusions do add up to a very large-scale warping of reality, a disorientation that is as significant and consequential as out-and-out delusion. The second reason junk food is a good example to start is that it's fundamental to the Buddha's teachings. Okay, it can't be literally fundamental to the Buddha's teachings, because 2,500 years ago when the Buddha taught, junk food as we know it didn't exist. What's fundamental to the Buddha's teachings, though, is the general dynamic of being powerfully drawn to sensory pleasure that winds up fleeting at best. One of the Buddha's main messages was that the pleasures we seek evaporate quickly and leave us thirsting for more. We spend our time looking for the next gratifying thing, the next powdered sugar donut, the next sexual encounter, the next status-enhancing promotion, the next online purchase, but the thrill always fades, and it always leaves us wanting more. The old Rolling Stone lyric, "I can't get no satisfaction," is, according to Buddhism, the human condition. Indeed, the Buddha is famous for asserting that life is pervaded by suffering. Some scholars say that's an incomplete rendering of his message, and that the word translated as suffering, dukkha, could, for some purposes, be translated as unsatisfactoriness. The book is Why Buddhism is True, the Science and Philosophy of Meditation and Enlightenment.
We are in the home stretch. This is the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jefferson Smith sitting in. It is the day before Bastille Day. It is Friday the 13th, and I have big news. The big news I have is that Dave Fulton, for those of you watching on YouTube, for those of you watching on Free Speech TV, had a chance to see his head next to my shoulder, has miraculously fixed the phone service. And therefore, we have a precious few minutes where if you call 202-808-9925, I will say it again, 202-808-9925, we believe there is a greater than 50% chance that we will be able to take your call. I could be wrong. I'm not going to say it's Dave's fault if it doesn't happen, but he is a hero if it does happen. Wanted to give you that chance in case you wanted to call, but for those people who kindly and even dutifully sent in their messages, I have a few to get through. Thank you, Jeff Smith, for what you do. Big fan. Hey, I'm a big fan of you. That's very nice. Okay. One point I would disagree with. It does matter how straight the gate. The menace of the years does find me afraid. I find myself searching online for the book, How to Survive in a Plutocracy, or Surviving the American Oligarchy. Point well taken. My question for you, what if there were a rule? He said was a rule, but it's were a rule. Condition contrary to fact requires a subjunctive mood. I don't know why I'm in the subjunctive mood today, but apparently I am. That outlined in clear, comprehensive, strict detail when a Supreme Court justice must be recused. There doesn't seem to be any fight back against these guys who think they're kings because they wear a robe, and some guy hollers, "Oh, yay," when they enter a room. There could be a way of fighting back against this branch of government that is clearly out of control. Do you think a law would survive or would have to be a constitutional amendment? Regarding the act of recusal, does it have to be inflicted legally? Good question. A rule of recusal wouldn't have to be in the Constitution, but typically recusal rules are rules of the court. I haven't looked at precedent, and I would not pretend expertise on the question of whether if Congress passed a recusal rule, if the Supreme Court would have to abide by it. That said, the court that would review it would be, in fact, the Supreme Court. And so, because they are the highest court, there is no court. By virtue of being the highest court, it means there's no higher court. And I'm reminded of what Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. said when he said, "What a judge will do is all I mean by law." And do I think that the Supreme Court would allow itself to be bound by Congress? My unfortunate answer is only maybe. Got another one. Please give us some commentary on your views concerning immigration. There's a long email that I'll read after the show, but here's a portion of it. What is our moral duty to these folks as we, less than 5% of the world's population, are producing a lion's share of the world's carbon pollution? So the first thing I'll say is that while I have had some allies and friends of mine who are leaders in the Native American community ask us to be careful with saying we are a nation of immigrants, we are a nation including immigrants. And and I think that we have to be both that and a nation of laws. A question I have is, what should those laws be? And I still wrestle with that and have not yet seen the model immigration law, the model border law that I think makes the most sense, that would balance humanity and sensibility and movement of people. And I think we could have a debate about how does a welfare state intersect with immigration rules? It's an interesting question. But the essence of the point I think you make here, that we have an additional moral responsibility as we inflict harm on other nations, as we have been colonial in our relationship to other nations, as we pollute the world, that ought to be included. I think we also provide value in the world. There are both sides of that ledger. I am a patriot, if only, or I want to say only, if significantly because I believe democracy is our best chance, and this lever has to be used in favor of democracy. That that moral consideration of the harm that we cause needs to be added to our moral consideration of how we treat everyone, including people who want to come to this country. And I would say on the economics, it's pretty clear that we've got labor shortages. We should root for people who want to come here and do stuff. That's to the good. And I'll also cite the soup. We have a soup. We are strengthened. It's not a mythology. Humanity is literally strengthened. In all of the ways, we are made better by expanding our horizons. That narrowness, that even Europe was harmed when they were harmed economically, when they started becoming more jingoistic and more ethnocentric. I am going to try to take a call. It is going to be an adventure, and we're going to try to take Paul from WCPT, Ain't Afraid of Me. Paul, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Paul, you are our first caller. What's up, Paul? Speak your piece.
Okay, well, I want to talk about how the Republicans are using the word lie
with
regard to Peter Strzok's interview before Congress. The Republicans have been sporting around an ex-FBI agent on right-wing talk radio shows who used to work for Robert Mueller. And this guy's assertion is that the way Robert Mueller is setting up Donald Trump in a perjury trap is his tactic is something like this. If Robert Mueller were to ask a witness, what color was the car? And the person were to say, it was red. Then Robert Mueller would look up the manufacturer's code number for what the color of the car was and said, no, it was mauve. You lied. See, this is what they say about Robert Mueller. But if Peter Strzok says in a text message, Donald Trump will win, we will stop them, they presume that the we is the FBI, not the American people. And this is in a personal text message.
Yeah.
Another interesting way they used this with Hillary Clinton was during the Benghazi investigation, they found an email from Hillary Clinton to Chelsea Clinton that said, I think this is terrorism. Therefore, when she said officially that this had to do with something else, it's a lie because she emailed Chelsea that she thinks it was a terrorism. But I can say, and almost everybody listening can say, that I will say things to my family, maybe email them about my job that I wouldn't say officially on my job.
Exactly. And I think to your deeper point, the word lie, the quick thing I'll say, and I'm going to try to take a bunch of calls in a row. The point on the use of the word lie is understand the game that is being played. And I had a back and forth with Talk Media News 2 days ago, and when the wonderful reporter from Talk Media News was saying that, offering their own confusion about what was going on, I said, I'm not confused because I don't believe that the exercise that is happening with their use of words is an exercise in pursuit of truth, debate, or reason. That's not what's happening. It's not that they're violating the rules. It's that they're playing a different game, that words are a tool of power. And that's what's happening. And the liberal tradition they are fighting against is not the liberal the way people think of it. Oh, it's like not being racist as much, or not being sexist as much, or not thinking that only rich people should have stuff. But the liberal tradition of the pursuit of reason. And that too is under assault. And we should be aware of that and work against it, but we need not be confused by it. Rich, listening and watching on Free Speech TV. Hello, Rich.
Hey, I just want to thank you for being on. It's kind of nice to get a little fresh, different view, like the soup rendition that was spoken earlier. And I also like the musical renditions that people were putting out. And the Pink Floyd thing, I think we're all pipers at the gates of dawn.
Nice.
And we need to rise up and not think till Friday the 13th is bad, and take the time to look deep in our hearts and make the right decisions.
And it's the day before Bastille Day. Karen on X-Ray FM, my home station, just named this week best radio station in Portland, 4th year in a row. Thank you to the people at X-Ray. Thank you to the staff at X-Ray. You are amazing, wonderful human beings. Karen, speak your piece.
Good morning. Good morning, Jefferson. Well, Jefferson, I often agree with you, but on immigrants, I do not. I think that you need to look at our foreign policy a lot more carefully and at our corporate policy a lot more carefully, as well as environmental policy, in order to evaluate what's moral or not relative to immigrants. You disappeared the School of the Americas. You've disappeared the role of corporations, say, in flooding Mexico with cheap grain and driving at least 2 million farmers out of corn growing, or the role of Walmart in driving small businesses out of business. And it's not so simple when you support death squads in El Salvador and a quarter to
who's the you? Who's the you in this scenario?
The United States.
Got it. Well, I think your points are well taken.
How do you not know about the School of the Americas? How do you not know about stuff?
Okay? I do.
And,
what was
and because it causes refugees and asylum seekers, our policies are wars. Look at the Middle East, for God's sake. What have we done there that you're so proud of? Okay, honey. Well, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much.
No, that was good. It's good to hear your voice, Karen. Thank you so much. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. We'll be back with a few more of your calls right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jeff. We're back on the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. It's good to be with you. And thanks to everybody who watches and participates on Free Speech TV. James from Tyler, Texas, your turn.
You're so worried about the immigrants. You have descendants of slaves who've been here, haven't been taken care of. You're saying that all these jobs people can't be in, but people are putting us in the penitentiary. That's why I can't understand. Why do you care so much about them, but you have a segment of your population that you're not even willing to talk to or take care of already that's already here? So until you take care of them, no, go home and go back. And you sit there and hear our leaders sitting there say it all the time. Y'all may not know who they are. Yvette Carnell, Dr. Boyce Watkins, Tone Talks. There's this what's the guy that he's an economist. I can't remember his name right now. He's slipping my mind right now. But there's so many of us sitting there saying, "Listen to us."
So James, why for you is it either or?
Solidarity, because that's what it is for y'all.
But who's y'all in this scenario?
Y'all will take y'all's side, but y'all will never be on our side of people who are already here who are needing help.
Who's y'all in this scenario?
The progressive, so y'all call yourself.
So what are the positions you're hoping progressives take that they won't take because they're supporting more humane immigration policy?
It's not about being humane. You have a population, like the lady just got from saying, you have a foreign policy that should be dealing with all that. You're talking about MS-13. What about Chicago?
But what's the thing? But so as I hear you want to go after progressives, that's fine. What's the thing that you want to promote? What's the thing?
I'm not going after you. I'm just sitting there saying, listen to what we're saying. Sandy Darity has a great study about population for black wealth versus white wealth.
Yeah,
and it doesn't get picked up the way that it should be picked up. Yvette Carnell isn't even the way she should be listened to. And what I'm trying to sit there and tell y'all is y'all are so worried. The progressives are so worried about the outside stuff. The sin of slaves are being just looked over completely in every category. And at this time, we are really sick of it because it doesn't make any sense for us to back those agendas when we can't even get police protection and get new forms of way to treat black folks in the inner city. But we're worried about how we're going to treat some migrants who come over here illegally, but we've got to worry about how we're going to be treating them. But you can't even treat your own population that's already here. You can't even treat them good. You can't even talk about reparations for them. But
Are you there? James, you there?
Yeah.
Okay. So I would say, if you want to talk reparations, I'm down. If you want to talk wealth disparities, I let you speak your piece. Let me speak mine. If you want to talk wealth disparities, you want to talk about the fact that aggregate wealth in the black community has not risen really since the Civil War, and I haven't seen a lot of 40 acres and I haven't seen a lot of mules. If you want to talk about the fact that entrenched poverty is being promoted by city planning, entrenched poverty is being promoted further by how we run our prison system, I'm down to talk about all that stuff. If you want to talk about, but do.
Okay,
so what's the do? This is a talk show.
The same way that they're doing on Fox News and the same way they do over there on CNN, the same way they do on MSNBC, nobody's taking those stories up. Nobody's talking about it. And that's
which is the story you want to make sure we get to?
I really just want to talk about stopping all immigration until our black population is taken care of.
All right. So that's where we disagree, because I don't think it has to be either or. I think if we're going to fight against oppression, we've got to try to fight against oppression in many forms. And I will not hold myself out as the most important observer of the highest priority elements of oppression. But I also don't want to only pick and choose and say we're only going to fight for this kind of salvation after we fought for this kind of salvation. That's where you and I disagree. I agree on the other stuff. This is Tom's Show. I'm Jeff. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. We are in the home stretch. We have a chance finally, thanks to the wonderful team here, of taking a few phone calls. We're going to try something right now. It's called 3 at a time. I'm going to take 3 calls. You're going to speak your piece. Keep it under 15 seconds if you possibly can. And then I'm going to respond to one or all of them after that. This way we'll be able to get through more calls since you've been bottled up the entire time. Let's start with James from Spokane. James, go ahead.
Hey, how's it going? First of all, drain the swamp. You know what I'm saying? Pump it up. And then secondly, I want to say about this apprentice mealy mouth president. We have DJ Trump. Hello? Hello?
Oh, I'm here. I'm listening to you.
Yeah, okay. The term mealy mouth is defined in the dictionary as euphemistic and insincere.
Yeah.
That's that man. And I'm telling you, DJ, if you know the term in music, I mean, it's a title.
Yeah.
He is so jive. DJ Trump suits him to the T.
DJ Trump. All right. Zach from Hollywood, California. Go ahead.
Yes, this is about when greed becomes so intoxicated with power that it becomes incompetent. The so-called conservative values are being exposed as fraudulent, and their incompetence in placing a bad, ineffective puppet who was known to be a 10-carat gold-plated fraud, is blowing up in their face. The New Yorkers knew it, but they didn't see it coming that the Hicks would so thoroughly embrace a blowhard con man with a fake okay signs, appealing to the most basic instinct that brown is bad, this shallow theme, this exercise in uncivility.
I appreciate your call. I want to go to John, Fayetteville, North Carolina.
Hey, how you doing? I just wanted to comment out the guy who just called in reference to he was setting up the argument for saying that about reparations and all that. I'm an African American, also retired veteran, 22 years in the military.
Thank you.
And I just don't accept his parameter, his argument, the parameters he set up in that argument. The either or. Reparations, deal with like we can only chew bubble gum and we can't walk at the same time. It was just ridiculous in how he presented his argument. No African American in his true heart and soul can feel the way that he just expressed himself. I mean, I could hear his frustration in his voice about reparations and all that, but that's a totally different argument, a totally different situation. We can take care of that at the same time as maintaining our humanity and accepting and doing what we need to do, setting up legislative rules and barriers and policies to go and accept people who are coming from South America. And
there's almost nothing I could agree with more in the whole world. Johnny, you still there? I think I cut you off.
Yeah, I'm still here.
If you want to finish your point, please do.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I've been deployed down in South America and all that, and I see the different cultures. An American is a person who makes an obligation to the Constitution. It doesn't matter what you look like. Doesn't matter what language you speak. It matters what you understand America to be and that you want to be a part of it. I mean, we come from Europe. We come from Asia. We come from all continents in the world. There's no reason why America is the richest, most powerful nation in the world cannot do our due diligence and accept refugees who are fleeing a situation that initially it started by us. I mean, we have to take the responsibility. Europe's doing what they need to do. We need to take a responsibility in our own continent and make sure we take care of our people and maintain our humanity. What the Republicans are trying to do, or the Conservative Party or agency, is trying to make us separate. When you separate us, we can't stand. I mean, if we stand together, we're more powerful. If we separate, we can't stand. We'll be sitting there bickering, just like he is about the reparations, when we could be standing together and taking care of all that in one lump sum.
I wish I could have played a music bed under your call. There are very few things that could be said under God's green earth that I could have agreed with greater power. I appreciate your call so much, John, and thank you for your service and your participation here. Hector from Chicago.
How you doing? I just heard the gentleman. He was so upset at black people not having priority as far as jobs and over Mexicans. And the way I look at it is, the Chinese came during the Ice Age, and every empire is a master of lies, and they want to simply say the Indians were all that were here, and it's old Mexico America is. So I know it sounds strange, put it that way.
No, man, Hector, I appreciate the call. I appreciate you taking the time. Mary, you're about to close us out.
Yes, I was wanting to make a comment about Congress yesterday and their words versus actions with that Peter Strzok and his text message.
Yeah.
My point is, when the Supreme Court made their ruling and Trump, on that Trump Muslim ban, and he said that his words about banning all Muslims, it didn't matter. It's what he did is what matters. Yeah. So wouldn't that apply to this here case also? As a ruling from the Supreme Court.
Yeah, but I think they're playing a different game. I think that they're not only playing a game of intellectual and legal and precedential consistency. I just think they're playing a little bit different game. Zach, Hollywood, yeah. I think you got about 20 seconds. Oh, I was wrong. Here's what I want to say. I want to say thank you to everybody for being with this show, for being with Thom, for building a community of democracy, for being a community that, yeah, will, of course, disagree from time to time, but ultimately be on the side of justice, on the side of humanity, on the side of democracy. And I thank you, the coalition of the benevolently irrational, the good people doing good things for no good reason, but I would say for a very good reason, and you are priceless. Worth a lot, not for sale. Thom will be back with you, and I've been really honored to be with you this week. Happy Bastille Day tomorrow. Happy 13th of Friday today.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Cameron Hughes scours the world looking for the finest wines. You can get more information about Cameron Hughes and his wines at chwine.com/Thom, Thom.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. More information is available over at thomsbeets.com, THOMSBEETS.com, or by calling 800-568-9889. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by XChair, the XChair chair, office chair. XChairTom.com is the website, XChairTHOM.com.